It's funny how a quiet Saturday afternoon can turn into something that lives in your head, whispering long after the sun goes down. Most people, when they look back on their youth, remember school dances or first crushes. Me, I remember the river. Not just any river, mind you, but that particular stretch of the Blackwood tucked deep into the provincial park, a place so remote even the deer seemed surprised to see you. I was 21 then, full of that careless confidence only youth can grant. Not quite a kid, but certainly not the man who now recounts this with a tremor in his voice. I'd spent my entire life around those woods, hiking, fishing, camping, you name it. It was my backyard, my escape, a place I knew like the back of my hand, or so I thought. My friends often teased me for being a loner, but the truth was I just preferred the company of towering pines and the rush of cold water to crowded bars. It felt real out there, grounded, and safe. That summer, I'd been working odd jobs, saving up for something I can't even recall now. Maybe a new fishing reel, maybe a trip somewhere less remote. The details don't matter. What does matter is that I had a few days off and a sudden urge to get away from everything. My usual spot was a small, sandy cove about 3 hours' drive from town, followed by a good hour's hike along an overgrown trail. Most people wouldn't bother. That was exactly why I loved it. I packed light, a sturdy tent, my old sleeping bag, a couple of MREs, and of course my fishing gear. I left late Friday afternoon, hitting the trail just as the sun was starting its slow descent, painting the sky in fiery oranges and purples. It was beautiful, truly breathtaking, and I felt that familiar calm wash over me. The air was cool and crisp, carrying the scent of pine needles and damp earth. The only sounds were my own boots crunching on fallen leaves and the distant, constant murmur of the river, pulling me deeper into its embrace. I reached the cove just before twilight melted into true darkness. It was perfect, just as I remembered. A small curve of clean sand, framed by thick reeds on one side and a gentle slope of forest on the other. The river here was wide and slow-moving, reflecting the fading sky like a dark mirror. I set up camp quickly, a practiced routine, and then with my small fire crackling, I settled down to watch the stars emerge, millions of pinpricks against the velvet black. There was something profoundly peaceful about being out there, completely alone. No cell service, no urgent emails, just the vast wilderness and me. I brewed a cup of instant coffee, watching the steam curl into the cool night air. The river gurgled softly, a soothing lullaby. I felt entirely at peace, completely in my element. I was competent, self-sufficient, and master of my own little patch of solitude. That's when it happened. The air grew unnaturally still. Not a breeze, not a rustle of leaves, not even the tiny flutter of an insect's wing. It was as if the entire forest held its breath. The river, which had been gently flowing, seemed to pause, its surface glassy and unmoving. And then from the thick, dark reeds directly across the bank, so faint it was barely there, a sound drifted across the water. A whisper, not the whisper of the wind, because there was no wind. Just a soft, drawn-out sound, like someone sighing my name. Jai. My breath hitched, my coffee cup, still warm in my hands, seemed to freeze. Every muscle in my body tensed. I squeezed my eyes shut, then opened them wide, scanning the opposite bank. The reeds were a dense, dark wall, impenetrable to the eye in the dim starlight. Nothing moved, not a ripple on the water, not a flicker of shadow that wasn't already there. Jai. It came again, clearer this time, though still a whisper, elongated like a drawn-out sigh. It was undeniably my name, and it came from the exact same spot. My first thought, the immediate, self-preserving instinct, was denial. It had to be the wind, I reasoned, except there was no wind. Maybe a trick of the acoustics, the river carrying some distant sound. But what distant sound would be my name, and why just a whisper? My heart started to hammer against my ribs, a frantic drum in the sudden, suffocating silence. I gripped the coffee cup so hard my knuckles turned white, my eyes strained, trying to pierce the darkness across the water. The Blackwood River wasn't narrow here, but it wasn't a vast lake either. It felt like a stone's throw, a distance easily traversed by a voice, even a quiet one. But who would be out there? This was my spot, my secluded sanctuary. No one else came this deep into the park, especially not after dark. Panic, cold and sharp, began to prick at the edges of my calm. I was alone, truly alone. No phone signal, miles from any road. If something was out there, if someone was out there, I was entirely vulnerable. The peaceful solitude I'd cherished moments before now felt like a terrifying trap. I tried to rationalize it again. An animal? No animal made that sound. A person then, but who? And why whisper my name? Why not call out properly? The insidious thought that someone might be playing a trick on me, a cruel prank, crossed my mind. But who knew I was here, and who would go to such lengths? I stayed perfectly still, listening, every nerve ending screaming. The silence that followed felt heavier, more oppressive than before. It wasn't an empty silence, it was a waiting silence, as if whatever had spoken was waiting for a response. I didn't move, I didn't speak. My eyes remained fixed on the reeds, trying to discern any shape, any movement. The starlight was just enough to show me the dark mass of foliage, the subtle sheen of the water, but nothing more. My imagination, however, was already working overtime, painting dark figures within the shadows. Minutes stretched into an eternity. My campfire crackled cheerfully, oblivious to the terror that had gripped me. Its warm glow, usually a comfort, now felt like a beacon, announcing my presence to whatever lurked in the darkness. I wanted to put it out, to plunge myself into absolute darkness, but the thought of being blind and deaf to my surroundings was even worse. Finally, slowly, the oppressive stillness began to recede. A faint breeze stirred, rustling the leaves in the forest behind me. The river resumed its gentle gurgle, a familiar, reassuring sound. The world seemed to breathe again, but I didn't. My heart was still pounding, a frantic echo of the fear that had washed over me. Had I imagined it? The question was a desperate plea from my rational mind. The air had been still, yes, but perhaps it was just a strange atmospheric condition. My name, maybe it sounded like my name, but wasn't. The desire to believe it was all a trick of my mind, a product of my isolation, and the dark was overwhelming. I forced myself to take a slow, deep breath, then another. My hands were trembling. I carefully placed the coffee cup on a nearby log. My eyes, however, never left the opposite bank. I pulled my fishing knife from its sheath, feeling the cool weight of the handle in my palm. It was a small comfort, a flimsy shield against the unknown. I spent the rest of the night huddled by the fire, the knife in my lap, listening to every snap of twig, every rustle of leaves. Sleep was impossible. Every shadow seemed to move, every sound seemed to hint at an unseen presence. The peace I'd felt earlier had been shattered, replaced by a gnawing dread that tightened its grip with every passing minute. The Blackwood, my safe haven, had become a place of unsettling whispers and unseen watchers. When the first slivers of dawn finally appeared, painting the sky in soft grays and pale pinks, a wave of exhaustion washed over me, mixed with a profound sense of relief. The dark, it seemed, held its secrets. Daylight brought a measure of safety, a return to the familiar. The forest sounds began to pick up, birds chirping, squirrels chattering. The river flowed as it always did, reflecting the brightening sky. It was as if the night's eerie incident had never happened. But I knew it had. The first thing I did, as soon as there was enough light to see clearly, was to scan the opposite bank again. The reeds stood tall and green, a solid, unbroken line. There was no sign of anything disturbed, no flattened path, no evidence that anyone or anything had been there. The surface of the river was pristine, reflecting the early morning light. It looked utterly normal, too normal. My rational mind, now bolstered by the sunlight, started to reassert itself. It must have been my imagination. I was tired, alone in a remote place. The mind played tricks. Maybe an owl's call, distorted by the water, had sounded like a whisper. Maybe a branch had creaked, and my sleep-deprived brain had supplied the word. I desperately wanted to believe these explanations. Yet a cold knot of certainty remained in my stomach. The silence before the sound, the unnerving stillness, was something I couldn't easily dismiss. It hadn't been a normal forest silence. It had been an unnatural silence. I decided I needed to get some sleep. My body ached from the night's vigil. But first, coffee, lots of coffee. As I brewed it, my hands still shook slightly. I tried to focus on the simple, practical tasks of camp life to ground myself. I ate an MRE, the bland food tasting like ash in my mouth. My hunger was overshadowed by a persistent unease. After eating, I zipped myself into my tent, despite the growing warmth of the morning. I pulled my sleeping bag tight around me, hoping for oblivion. But even cocooned in canvas, my senses were heightened. Every rustle of leaves, every distant bird call made me jump. Sleep came fitfully, punctuated by vivid, terrifying dreams of whispering shadows and unseen eyes. I woke up a few hours later, disoriented and no less anxious. The sun was high, piercing through the trees, dappling my tent with light. The sounds of the forest were in full swing, a symphony of life. It felt safer now, more real. I pushed down the lingering fear, determined to shake off the strange experience. I needed to do something normal, something familiar. Fishing, that was it. My reason for coming here. I grabbed my rod and tackle box, forcing a sense of purpose into my movements. The routine, the focused task, would clear my head. I spent the next few hours by the river's edge, casting my line, letting the rhythmic motion soothe my frayed nerves. The fish weren't biting, which was unusual for this spot, but I didn't care. I just needed to feel normal, to re-establish my connection with this place. But even as I cast, my gaze kept drifting across the river to the dense wall of reeds. It was an involuntary act, a persistent pull. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every time a shadow shifted or a bird burst from the foliage, I flinched, my heart leaping into my throat. Around midday, I decided to explore. Maybe a hike would help, a long, strenuous hike to burn off this nervous energy. I chose a trail that followed the river upstream, a path I knew well. I moved with a strange blend of caution and recklessness, half hoping to find something, half dreading it. The forest was beautiful, as always. Sunbeams slanted through the canopy, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. The scent of pine and damp earth filled my lungs. The river rushed alongside me, its constant murmur a familiar companion. For a while, the simple act of walking, of putting one foot in front of the other, pushed the lingering unease into the background. But as I walked, I began to notice things. Small things easily dismissed but accumulating into a disturbing pattern. A branch snapped in the distance, but when I stopped to listen, there was only silence. A rustle in the undergrowth seemed to move with me just out of sight. I would stop, listen, and it would stop too. When I resumed walking, it would start again. My skin prickled. It felt like I was being followed. I quickened my pace, my eyes darting into the woods on either side. Nothing, just the endless trees, the dappled sunlight, the deceptive peace. I tried to tell myself it was just paranoia, a lingering effect of the night. But the feeling was too persistent, too specific. It wasn't just a general unease, it was a definite sense of another presence. I walked for what felt like hours, pushing deeper upstream, far beyond where I usually ventured. The trail became less defined, the forest thicker. The sun was starting its slow descent when I decided to turn back. I was tired, sweaty, and my nerves were strung tight. As I began my return journey, the feeling of being watched intensified. It was almost a physical sensation, a pressure on the back of my neck. I started to hear things again, faint snaps, distant rustles, always just beyond my direct perception. Then I saw it. It was subtle, barely noticeable, but my heightened senses caught it. On the soft earth of the trail just ahead of me was an indentation, a footprint. My blood ran cold. I knelt down, examining it closely. It was a clear impression, too large to be an animal, too defined to be merely a depression in the soil. It was definitely a human footprint, and it wasn't mine. It was barefoot. My mind reeled. Barefoot in this wilderness. It was absurd. Even the most hardened outdoorsman wouldn't traverse this terrain without boots. The ground was littered with sharp stones, thorns, jagged roots, yet there it was, a long, slender foot with clearly defined toes. I looked ahead, then behind me. The trail was otherwise undisturbed. No other footprints were visible, not even faint ones. It was as if this one had simply materialized, and it pointed in the direction I was heading. A wave of pure, unadulterated fear washed over me. This wasn't imagination. This wasn't a trick of the light or sound. This was real. Someone was here, someone who had left a barefoot print. I straightened up, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The peaceful woods had transformed into something menacing, something alien. The whispering voice from last night, the feeling of being followed, the isolated footprint, it all coalesced into a single, terrifying truth. I was not alone, and whoever was here was not friendly. I started to walk, then quickly broke into a jog. My earlier fatigue was gone, replaced by a desperate surge of adrenaline. I needed to get back to my camp. I needed to pack up and leave. The Blackwood River, my sanctuary, had become a nightmare. As I hurried back, the forest seemed to close in around me. Every shadow held a potential threat. Every sound was magnified, distorted into something sinister. I didn't dare look back. I just ran, my breath ragged, my lungs burning. When I finally burst into my small cove, my camp still stood undisturbed. My tent, my fire pit, my gear, everything was exactly as I'd left it. The sight brought a momentary wave of relief, quickly followed by a fresh surge of dread. It looked normal, but nothing felt normal anymore. The sun was low now, casting long, eerie shadows. The cheerful warmth of the day was fading, replaced by the chill of approaching night. I had to leave. Now. I started to pack with frantic haste, my movements jerky and inefficient. My hands fumbled with the tent poles, my mind racing. Every rustle in the trees, every creak of a branch made me jump, expecting to see a figure emerge from the shadows. Just as I was rolling up my sleeping bag, a sound caught my attention. It wasn't a whisper this time. It was a faint, almost imperceptible scratching. It came from inside my tent. I froze, my hands still on the sleeping bag. My tent was zipped up. I knew I had zipped it up. My eyes locked onto the entrance flap. The scratching continued, a soft, repetitive sound like fingernails dragging lightly across canvas. It was coming from the very back of the tent where my head would normally rest. My blood ran cold. Whatever had made that footprint, whatever had been following me, it was now inside my tent, or it had been. I took a shaky step back, reaching for my fishing knife again. The small blade felt utterly inadequate. "Hello," I croaked, my voice barely a whisper. My throat was dry, tight with fear. The scratching stopped instantly. The silence that followed was absolute, even more unnerving than before. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, deafening drum. I stood there, paralyzed, staring at the inert canvas shell of my tent. Had I left something inside that could make that sound? A branch, perhaps, caught in the wind? No, there was no wind strong enough to make a branch scratch like that, and it had sounded like fingernails. After what felt like an eternity, I forced myself to move. I circled the tent slowly, cautiously, my eyes scanning every inch of the canvas, every seam. Nothing. No bulge, no tear, no sign of anything having entered or exited. Then, as I reached the back of the tent, the area where the scratching had originated, I saw it. Scrawled crudely on the canvas, as if drawn with a stick or a sharp stone, was a symbol. It wasn't letters or anything I recognized. It was a series of intersecting lines forming a jagged, asymmetric spiral, almost like a crude fingerprint or an abstract eye. It was simple, yet deeply unsettling. And then, just below the symbol, written in the same crude fashion, were two words. "Comes find." My entire body went numb. The air left my lungs in a whoosh. My blood ran cold, then hot, then icy cold again. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't my imagination. This was deliberate. This was personal. And it was a challenge, an invitation, a demand. Panic, raw and visceral, erupted within me. I didn't care about anything else. I didn't care about my gear, my camp, my fishing trip. I just needed to get out, get away. I grabbed my backpack, stuffing the half-rolled sleeping bag into it haphazardly. I left the tent standing, abandoned. I didn't even bother to put out the fire. My only thought was escape. I threw the pack over my shoulder and spun around, intending to bolt for the trail. But as I turned, my eyes caught something glinting on the sandy ground, right in the center of my campsite. It was a small, smooth river stone, about the size of my thumb. And on its surface, drawn with incredible detail, was the exact same symbol that was on my tent. The jagged spiral like a crude fingerprint or an abstract eye. My gaze snapped back to the tent, then to the stone. It was identical. This was no random act, this was deliberate. And the stone, it was a message left for me in the very heart of my supposed safe zone. My eyes swept the surrounding woods, frantically searching. The shadows were deepening, the last rays of sunlight fading. The familiar chirping of birds was being replaced by the hoot of an owl, a sound that now seemed ominous. A whisper so faint I almost missed it, drifted from the dark reeds across the river. "Ajayi." It was closer this time, more defined, and it wasn't just my name. It was followed by something else, something barely audible, a guttural sound that seemed to rumble from deep within the earth, twisting into words. "Comes play." My heart leaped into my throat. This was it. the breaking point. The unseen presence was no longer content to simply watch. It was beckoning, luring, and it sounded ancient. I didn't hesitate, I didn't think, I just ran. I crashed through the undergrowth, not even bothering with the trail. I just ran in the general direction of where my car was parked, miles and miles away. Thorns tore at my clothes, branches whipped at my face, but I barely registered the pain. My only thought was to put as much distance as possible between myself and that terrifying place. The setting sun painted the sky in streaks of blood red and bruised purple, a fitting backdrop for my terror. The forest, once a comfort, was now a claustrophobic tunnel of grasping branches and menacing shadows. Every rustle, every snap, every creak sent fresh jolts of adrenaline through me. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs ached. I ran until the darkness was almost complete, guided only by the faint light of the rising moon filtering through the dense canopy. I stumbled, fell, picked myself up, and kept running. I didn't know what I was running from: a person, an animal, something else, something far more sinister. My rational mind offered no answers, only a primal, overwhelming urge to escape. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I stumbled out of the dense woods and onto the gravel path that led to the small, remote parking area. The relief was immense, almost debilitating. I sagged against a tree, gasping for breath, my body trembling uncontrollably. My old pickup truck sat there, a rusty beacon of civilization. I fumbled with my keys, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped them. I yanked open the door, practically falling inside, and started the engine with a desperate twist of the key. The roar of the old engine was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. I threw the truck into reverse, spinning gravel as I turned, then floored it, tearing down the dirt road. I didn't look back. I didn't even glance in the rearview mirror. I just drove, speeding away from the darkness, from the whispers, from the unsettling symbols, from the feeling of unseen eyes. But even as I drove, the image of that crude spiral symbol, the words "come," "find," burned into my mind, and the chilling sound of that ancient guttural voice twisting into "come," "play," echoed in my ears. I drove all night, not stopping until the first rays of dawn touched the horizon. I was far from the Blackwood, far from the provincial park, but I knew with a terrible certainty that I hadn't left it all behind. The whispers had followed me, the chilling invitation had been issued, and a part of me, a deep, irrational part I didn't want to acknowledge, felt a strange, terrifying pull. The forest had changed, and it had marked me. I finally pulled into a small, nondescript motel on the outskirts of a town I didn't recognize. The sun was fully up now, a bright, unforgiving light that seemed to mock the terror I had experienced. I checked in, paid cash, and locked myself in the small, sterile room. I stripped off my torn, dirt-stained clothes and stepped into the shower, letting the hot water run over me. I scrubbed my skin raw, trying to wash away the feeling of unseen hands, the grime of the forest, the memory of that strange, disturbing touch. But the water, no matter how hot, couldn't wash away the fear. As I toweled myself dry, I caught sight of my reflection in the steamed-up mirror. My face was pale, my eyes wide and bloodshot, dark circles beneath them. I looked like a ghost. And then I saw it. On my right forearm, just below the elbow, was a faint red mark. It was subtle, barely visible, as if scratched lightly into my skin, but the pattern was unmistakable. It was the jagged spiral, the crude fingerprint, the abstract eye. Identical to the one on my tent, identical to the one on the river stone. My blood ran cold again, this time with a profound, bone-deep terror. It hadn't just been on my tent, it hadn't just been on a stone, it was on me. A cold, clammy hand seemed to grip my heart. It hadn't just found me, it had touched me, marked me. The image of that barefoot footprint, the words on my tent, the whispered invitation from the reeds, it all flooded back with renewed, terrifying clarity. It wasn't just a threat, it was an intrusion, a claim. I pressed my fingers against the mark as if I could rub it away. But it was there, a faint, undeniable scar. It wasn't deep, barely breaking the skin, but it felt like it had been etched directly onto my soul. I stumbled back, collapsing onto the edge of the bed. My mind raced, trying to make sense of the impossible. How, when, I hadn't felt anything, but the mark was there, a chilling testament to the reality of my experience. This wasn't over, it had only just begun. The Blackwood River had given me a dark gift, a lasting reminder of the terror I had encountered. And that mark, that strange, unsettling symbol on my skin, felt like an anchor, pulling me back to the darkness I had so desperately tried to escape. I stared at the symbol, my heart thumping a slow, heavy beat. The quiet Saturday afternoon, the peaceful camping trip had vanished entirely. This was no longer just a memory, it was a brand, and I had a terrible feeling that whatever had left it wasn't finished with me yet. The forest had whispered my name, then beckoned. Now it had left its indelible mark, a sign that the hunt had begun and I was the prey. I stumbled back from the mirror, collapsing onto the edge of the bed. The sterile white walls of the motel room, meant to be a comfort, now felt like the padded cell of a nightmare. My mind raced, grappling with the impossible, with the undeniable mark on my arm. It wasn't fading. It wasn't a trick of the light. It was there, a subtle red line, a chilling brand. How, when I hadn't felt anything, no scratch, no sting, just a faint, almost invisible etching on my skin. It was as if it had simply appeared, a silent, insidious invasion. I pressed my fingers against it again, willing it to disappear, to be a figment of my terrified imagination. But the rough texture of the scar tissue, however slight, was real. My breath hitched. This wasn't over. It had only just begun. The Blackwood River had given me a dark gift, a lasting reminder of the terror I had encountered. And that mark, that strange, unsettling symbol on my skin, felt like an anchor, pulling me back to the darkness I had so desperately tried to escape. I stared at the symbol, my heart thumping a slow, heavy beat. The quiet Saturday afternoon, the peaceful camping trip had vanished entirely. This was no longer just a memory, it was a brand, and I had a terrible feeling that whatever had left it wasn't finished with me yet. The forest had whispered my name, then beckoned. Now it had left its indelible mark, a sign that the hunt had begun and I was the prey. The motel room, for all its mundane reality, offered no solace. Every shadow seemed to deepen, every creak of the building sounded like a footstep. I couldn't stay there, I couldn't stay anywhere. I packed my meager belongings, my eyes constantly darting to the mark on my arm. It felt like a ticking clock, a countdown to something unknown and dreadful. I drove out of the motel parking lot, the early morning sun already harsh and unfeeling. Where to go? Home. My small apartment in town felt too close to the Blackwood, too exposed. And how could I explain any of this to anyone? Who would believe me? A barefoot footprint, a whispering voice, a symbol scrawled on a tent, and now a matching one on my arm. They'd think I'd gone mad. I decided to drive, just drive, away from the Blackwood, away from everything familiar. I needed distance, not just physical, but mental. I needed to process, to deny, to somehow rationalize the impossible. The miles rolled by, the landscape blurring outside my window. Gas stations, diners, small towns, they all looked the same, a monotonous parade of normalcy that felt utterly alien to my fractured state. I subsisted on stale coffee and greasy fast food, my stomach in knots. I kept my right arm tucked against my side, trying to hide the mark from unseen eyes, even though I knew it was futile. It was on me. It was a part of me now. Sleep was a fractured thing, snatched in cheap motel rooms with the lights on, or in rest stops with the windows cracked and my hand on the gear shift. Every dream was a twisted echo of the Blackwood, reeds whispering my name, shadowy figures with long, slender feet, the chilling guttural voice, "Come, play." I'd wake in a cold sweat, heart pounding, the mark on my arm throbbing with an imagined pulse. Days bled into a week. I'd driven hundreds of miles, crossing state lines, but the fear was a persistent passenger. It was a cold, silent weight in my gut, a constant prickle on the back of my neck. I tried to convince myself it was just extreme stress, a hallucination brought on by isolation and lack of sleep. I pinched myself, slapped my face, anything to shock myself back to reality. But the reality was the symbol on my arm. One evening, I found myself in a small, dusty town deep in the heartland, far from any major wilderness. It was the kind of place where time seemed to have forgotten to move, where the local diner served pie that tasted like someone's grandmother made it. I pulled into the parking lot of a local library, a sturdy brick building with a quiet, welcoming air. Maybe, just maybe, I could find an answer there. I walked inside, feeling like a phantom in a world of solid people. The librarian, a kindly older woman with glasses perched on her nose, gave me a polite smile. I avoided her gaze, feeling the weight of the mark on my arm. I gravitated towards the mythology section, then folklore, then regional history. I had no idea what I was looking for. An old legend, a local monster, anything that might explain a barefoot figure, a strange symbol, a voice from the reeds. I spent hours poring over dusty tomes, scanning indexes, my fingers tracing lines of text. Cryptids, nature spirits, forgotten gods, I read about everything from the Jersey Devil to Sasquatch, from banshees to river trolls. Nothing fit, nothing even came close. There were plenty of stories of eerie forests and strange disappearances, but nothing mentioned my symbol or a voice whispering a name. Frustration mounted. I was grasping at straws, trying to fit an impossible experience into a framework of known myths. The library was closing. I gathered my things, disheartened. As I passed the local history section, a book with a faded green cover caught my eye. It was titled Echoes of the Blackwood, Legends and Lore of the Northern Provincial Park. My breath caught in my throat. The Blackwood, my Blackwood. I picked it up, my hands trembling. It was old, clearly self-published, filled with grainy photographs and local anecdotes. It looked like the kind of book put together by an amateur historian, filled with charming local quirks and exaggerated campfire tales. I took it to the front desk. The librarian smiled again. "Good choice, dear. That one's a real gem. Old Mr. Abernathy, God rest his soul, put his heart and soul into that one. Said the Blackwood had more secrets than a serpent has scales." I managed a weak smile in return. "Thank you." Back in my motel room, the book felt heavy in my hands, a tangible link to the place I was so desperately trying to forget. I opened it to the first page, the musty scent of old paper filling my nostrils. The introduction spoke of the pristine wilderness, the untouched beauty, the legends whispered around campfires for generations. I skipped through the chapters on logging history and local flora and fauna, my eyes searching for anything unusual. Then I found it. A chapter titled The Whispering Reeds and the Deep Woods Eye. My heart began to pound. I devoured the text. It spoke of a local legend, a vague, almost forgotten tale passed down by the indigenous people who once inhabited the area around the Blackwood. They spoke of a whisperer, a spirit of the deep woods, ancient and territorial. It was said to inhabit the deepest, most untouched parts of the forest, particularly near the river's edge where the reeds grew thickest. The whisperer was described not as a malicious entity, but as something fundamentally other. It didn't seek to harm, but to lure. It called out to those who ventured too deep, those who were alone, those who were receptive. It would whisper their name, drawing them in, inviting them to come and play. My blood ran cold. Come, play. The words echoed in my memory, perfectly matching the chilling voice I'd heard. And then I saw it, a crudely drawn illustration accompanying the text. It was a symbol, an intricate, jagged spiral, almost like a crude fingerprint or an abstract eye. It was identical to the one on my tent, identical to the river stone, identical to the one now etched into my skin. My hand flew to my forearm. The mark seemed to burn, an invisible fire radiating from the symbol. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't a hallucination. This was real, and it had a name, the Whisperer. The book went on to describe the Whisperer's mark. Those who heard its call and were deemed chosen or worthy would receive a symbol, usually on their skin, a sign of its invitation. The mark wasn't permanent or painful, often fading after a time, but it signified a connection, a bond. It meant the Whisperer had taken an interest and would continue to call, to draw the marked individual back to its domain. A cold dread settled deep in my bones, fading after a time. That implied it wasn't supposed to be permanent, but mine hadn't faded. In fact, it felt more pronounced, more alive. The author, Mr. Abernathy, ended the chapter with a cautious note. He believed these were just old stories, cautionary tales for children to stay out of the dangerous woods. But he also admitted a strange fascination with the symbols and the consistency of the legend across generations. He even mentioned finding similar symbols carved into ancient trees deep in the park, far from any established trails, just like the barefoot print. I slammed the book shut, my mind reeling. It was all there, every terrifying detail, every impossible occurrence. It wasn't just happening to me, it was part of an ancient legend, and I somehow was now a part of it. I couldn't sleep that night. The truth, however horrifying, was now out in the open. I was marked, I was chosen, and the Whisperer wanted me back. The next morning, I decided I needed to go home. Not to stay, but to gather my thoughts, to prepare. I couldn't outrun this, not anymore. The mark was a leash pulling me back. The drive home was a blur. My apartment, once a sanctuary, now felt suffocating. I locked the doors, drew the blinds, and tried to process everything. I showed the mark to no one, inventing stories about a scrape or an insect bite if anyone happened to catch a glimpse. The lie felt flimsy, transparent. Life tried to resume some semblance of normalcy. I picked up odd jobs again, went through the motions. But every moment was tainted by the knowledge of the Whisperer. Every shadow in my peripheral vision seemed to move. Every gust of wind sounded like a whisper. The Blackwood, though miles away, felt closer than ever. The mark on my arm refused to fade. In fact, it sometimes seemed to pulse with a faint, almost imperceptible warmth. It was subtle, but it was there, a constant reminder. Then the dreams started to change. They were no longer just echoes of fear. They became vivid, almost real immersions into the Blackwood. I would be walking through familiar trails, the sunlight dappling the leaves, the river murmuring softly. And then the silence would fall, the unnatural stillness, and the whispers would begin. Ajayi. But now the dreams offered more. I would see glimpses, fleeting images, a flash of movement between the trees too quick to discern, a ripple on the surface of the river where no stone had fallen, and the symbol, always the symbol, etched into the bark of ancient trees, woven into the patterns of the reeds. I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that the whisperer was still calling. It was reaching into my mind, its invitation growing stronger, more insistent. One particularly vivid dream had me standing by the very cove where I'd camped. The fire was long out, the tent gone, but the reeds across the river were alive, swaying even without a breeze, and from their depths a shape began to emerge. It was indistinct, shifting like smoke given form, but it was tall, slender, and seemed to hum with an ancient energy. It raised an arm, long and skeletal, and pointed directly at me. Then the voice, no longer a whisper, but a resonant hum that vibrated through my very bones. You are marked. Come, find, play. I woke with a scream caught in my throat, drenched in sweat. The room was dark, silent, save for the frantic pounding of my heart. I grabbed my phone, illuminating my arm. The symbol seemed to glow faintly, an optical illusion in the dim light, but the sensation of warmth was undeniable. I couldn't take it anymore. The constant fear, the disturbing dreams, the feeling of being hunted. I needed to act. I needed to confront this, or at least understand it further. I spent days researching. Not just folklore, but geology, local history, anything I could find about the specific region of the Blackwood. I learned that the provincial park was vast, largely unexplored, with sections designated as old-growth forest untouched for centuries. The river itself was ancient, carving its way through Precambrian rock formations. There were references to isolated cabins, long abandoned, deep within the woods, far from any trails. I felt a strange pull towards these abandoned places, a horrifying curiosity. Was the whisperer tied to a specific location, a nexus point? Was there a history, a narrative beyond the simple legend? My savings, which I'd been building for some forgotten purpose, were steadily dwindling, spent on gas, cheap motels, and whatever small comfort I could find. I was neglecting my friends, making excuses, pushing them away. They saw the changes in me, the gaunt face, the haunted eyes, the jumpiness. They worried. But how could I tell them the truth? One evening, my oldest friend, Mark, stopped by unannounced. He was burly, kind, with a no-nonsense attitude honed by years of working as a mechanic. He found me hunched over my laptop, surrounded by printouts of old maps and blurry photos of strange rock formations. "Jay," he said, his voice softer than usual. "You look like hell. What's going on? You've been holed up for weeks. You're not answering calls. People are worried." I flinched, startled by his presence. I tried to gather the papers to hide the evidence of my obsession. "Nothing, Mark, just been busy, stress." He sat down heavily on the couch, the springs groaning. "Stress? Jay, I've known you my whole life. You used to disappear into the Blackwood for days, come back refreshed. Now you look like you've seen a ghost. What happened out there?" I hesitated. Could I tell him? He was practical, logical. He'd laugh, or worse, he'd think I was having a breakdown. But the burden was crushing me. Mark, I began, my voice barely a whisper. Something happened at the river, something impossible. He looked at me, his brow furrowed with concern. Impossible how? I took a deep breath, and for the first time I told someone. I told him everything. The silence, the whisper, the barefoot print, the symbol on the tent, the words come, find, the frantic escape, and then the mark on my arm. As I spoke, I instinctively pulled up my sleeve, revealing the symbol. Mark stared at it, then at my face. His expression shifted from concern to bewilderment, then to something akin to shock. "Jay, what is that?" he asked, his voice low. He reached out, his finger hovering inches above my arm as if afraid to touch it. "It's a mark," I said, my voice cracking. From the whisperer. I pointed to the open book on my lap. "It's an old legend. I found it in a book." He picked up the book, flipping through the pages until he found the chapter on the whisperer. His eyes widened as he saw the illustration of the symbol. He looked at the book, then at my arm, then back at the book. His practical, logical mind was clearly struggling to process this. This is crazy, Jay," he finally said, shaking his head. "You're telling me an old legend, a ghost story actually marked you." "I know how it sounds," I said, my voice flat. "Believe me, I've spent weeks trying to tell myself I imagined it, but the mark is real. The whispers were real, and it's still calling me, Mark, in my dreams. It wants me to go back." He sat in silence for a long moment, rubbing his chin. He wasn't laughing. He wasn't dismissing me outright. That in itself was a small comfort. "Look, Jay," he finally said, "I don't know what to tell you. I've never believed in any of that supernatural stuff, but you're not well, and that mark, it's clearly there." He paused, then continued. "Are you sure it wasn't some kind of animal scratch or a plant you brushed against?" "No," I said firmly. "It's the same symbol, Mark, exactly the same." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "All right, let's say for a second I believe you. What are you going to do?" "I don't know," I admitted. "Part of me wants to just disappear, move to another country, change my name. But another part, it feels like I can't escape it, like it won't let me. And I keep thinking about what Mr. Abernathy wrote, that those who are marked are drawn back, that it's an invitation." "An invitation to what?" Mark asked, his voice sharp with concern. "To get lost in the woods, to disappear like those old legends say people did." "I don't know," I repeated, feeling the despair rise. "But I can't just keep living like this, looking over my shoulder, jumping at every sound. I need to understand. I need to find out what it is and how to make it stop." Mark stood up, pacing the small apartment. "So you're thinking of going back?" The thought sent a shiver down my spine, but the answer was already forming in my mind. I think I have to. It won't leave me alone otherwise." He stopped pacing, turning to face me. His expression was serious. "Then I'm coming with you." My head snapped up. "What? No, Mark, you can't. This isn't your fight, and it's dangerous. You don't know what it is." "And you do, Jay," he countered, a hint of steel in his voice. "Look at you. You're a mess. You're going back into that wilderness alone to face whatever this is. No way. You're my friend. I'm not letting you walk into that alone." I wanted to protest, to tell him he was crazy, that he didn't understand the depth of the horror. But a warmth spread through me, a faint flicker of hope in the overwhelming darkness. Having someone with me, someone who at least partially believed me, felt like a lifeline. "Okay," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Okay, but we need to be prepared. This isn't a camping trip." And so the decision was made. Mark, my skeptical, practical friend, was going to accompany me back to the Blackwood. The next few days were spent in a feverish frenzy of preparation. We bought new gear, stronger flashlights, a satellite phone. Even though I knew there was no signal deep in the park, it was a psychological comfort, a first aid kit, and more MREs. Mark, being a meticulous planner, even acquired a detailed topographical map of the provincial park, highlighting every stream and contour. I showed him the locations I'd marked from my own research. The old-growth forest, the areas where Mr. Abernathy had mentioned finding ancient carvings, and of course, my original campsite. As we prepared, the strange occurrences continued, though subtly. The whispers in my dreams grew louder, more distinct. The mark on my arm felt warmer, more insistent. Sometimes I'd catch a faint scent of damp earth and pine needles, even when I was nowhere near the woods. It was as if the Blackwood itself was reaching out, pulling me in. Mark, for his part, remained stoic. He didn't see the mark pulse, he didn't hear the whispers. But he saw me, the fear in my eyes, the desperation, and that was enough for him. He trusted me, even if he didn't fully believe in the supernatural aspects. He believed in my experience. "All right, Jay," he said one evening, packing a heavy-duty axe into his duffel bag. "We've got everything we can think of. What's the plan? We go back to your old spot, right?" "No," I said, shaking my head. "That spot is too exposed, too close to the river where it first called. The book said the whisperer is deepest in the old growth. I think we need to go deeper to try and find the source, or at least a place where we can try to understand it." I pointed to a section of the map, a dense, dark green area miles upstream from my original campsite, even further into the heart of the park. It was marked with a tiny, almost illegible notation, "Ancient Glade, Unsurveyed." Mark whistled. "That's deep, Jay, days from any road, and unsurveyed. That means no trails, no markers. We'd be going completely off-grid." "That's where it is," I said, with a conviction that surprised even myself. The dreams, the constant pull, it was all pointing to this untouched heart of the Blackwood. That's where we'll find answers, or something. A grim determination settled on his face. "Okay, deep it is, but we go slow, we stay alert, and we stick together. No heroics, understand. If things get too weird, we turn tail and run." I nodded, grateful for his presence, for his practicality. He was my anchor, my connection to the rational world. We set a date, early morning, to give us maximum daylight for the initial hike. The night before, I barely slept. The whispers were a cacophony in my mind. The symbol on my arm felt hot, almost burning. It was like a siren call, relentless and terrifying. As the first slivers of dawn painted the sky, we loaded up Mark's sturdy SUV. The back was packed with supplies, more than I'd ever carried for a camping trip. This wasn't a camping trip. This was an expedition into the unknown, a desperate search for answers. The drive to the provincial park entrance was silent, tense. The familiar sign, Blackwood Provincial Park, nature's untouched beauty, seemed to mock me. Untouched, perhaps, but beautiful not anymore, not for me. We parked Mark's SUV in the same remote parking lot where I'd abandoned my truck weeks ago. My old pickup was gone, picked up by a local tow service I'd called eventually, explaining it as a sudden illness. As we locked the doors, the air was still and cold, carrying the familiar scent of pine and damp earth. But this time it felt heavy, laden with unspoken promises and ancient secrets. We shouldered our heavy packs. The weight was grounding, a physical reminder of the task ahead. Mark looked at me, his eyes serious. "Ready, Jay?" I took a deep breath, steeling myself. My gaze drifted to the dense tree line, to the winding path that disappeared into the wilderness. The whispers seemed to be swirling around me, clearer now, almost audible even in the daylight. "Ready," I said, the word a grim vow. We stepped onto the trail, leaving the last vestiges of civilization behind. The forest immediately wrapped around us, taller, denser, more ancient than I remembered. The canopy quickly blocked out the rising sun, plunging us into a perpetual twilight. The air grew colder, the sounds of the distant road fading, replaced by the rustle of leaves and the distant murmur of the Blackwood River. Mark, with his innate sense of direction and his experience in the woods, took the lead. He moved with a quiet competence, his eyes scanning the path, watching for obstacles, for any sign of trouble. I followed closely behind, my senses heightened, every nerve ending screaming. The mark on my arm pulsed steadily, a rhythmic throb that mirrored the frantic beating of my heart. The initial hours were spent navigating familiar trails, pushing past the point where I usually turned back. The further we went, the less defined the path became. Soon, it disappeared entirely, swallowed by the encroaching wilderness. We were now truly off-trail, relying solely on Mark's map and compass and my unsettling intuition. The forest here was different, older. The trees were colossal, their trunks scarred and gnarled with age, their branches interlocked to form a nearly impenetrable ceiling. The ground was a tangle of exposed roots, moss-covered rocks, and fallen, decaying logs. The silence was profound, broken only by our footsteps and the occasional, distant cry of an unseen bird. I felt a growing sense of unease, a familiar dread creeping up my spine. It was the same oppressive stillness I'd experienced that first night, but now it was constant. The air was heavy, thick with something I couldn't quite name. "It feels different here," I whispered to Mark, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet. He nodded, not taking his eyes off the path ahead. Older, heavier, like the trees are watching us. We pressed on, pushing through dense thickets, clambering over fallen trees. The going was slow and arduous. The sun, when it occasionally pierced through the canopy, cast eerie, shifting patterns on the forest floor, making every shadow seem alive. Around midday, we stopped to rest by a small, trickling stream. The water was icy cold, refreshing, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I scanned the surrounding trees, my hand instinctively going to the fishing knife strapped to my belt. It felt inadequate against the pervasive, unseen threat. Mark pulled out a sandwich, offering me half. I shook my head, my stomach too clenched to eat. "We need to keep moving. I feel it getting closer." He gave me a concerned look, but didn't argue. He understood the urgency, even if he didn't share the same visceral fear. As we continued, the forest grew even more ancient. The trees became monoliths, their bark rough and dark. The undergrowth thinned out, replaced by a carpet of deep green moss and ferns. It felt like walking into a forgotten cathedral, hushed and sacred, yet deeply unsettling. Then I saw them. Carvings, faint, almost swallowed by the bark of an enormous oak tree. They were crude, weathered, but unmistakable. The jagged spiral, the abstract eye, my symbol. "Mark," I hissed, pointing. He stopped, his eyes following my gaze, his breath caught. Holy, Mr. Abernathy wasn't kidding. There were more on a nearby rock, half hidden by moss, on the smooth surface of a fallen log. They were everywhere, subtle, ancient, woven into the very fabric of the forest. They weren't freshly carved, they looked centuries old, a testament to the Whisperer's long presence in these woods. The sight solidified my conviction. This was it. This was where the legend lived. The mark on my arm throbbed, a steady, insistent pulse. "We're close," I whispered, my voice trembling with a mixture of fear and awe. "To the glade, I can feel it." We pushed on, our pace quickening despite the exhaustion. The carvings became more frequent, like breadcrumbs leading us deeper into the heart of the mystery. The air grew colder, even though there was no breeze. The silence became absolute, a heavy blanket pressing down on us. No birds, no insects, no rustling leaves. Then we broke through a final curtain of ancient ferns. We stood at the edge of a clearing, the ancient glade. It wasn't a glade in the traditional sense, bright and sunlit. It was a vast, circular depression in the forest, surrounded by impossibly tall, ancient trees that formed a natural amphitheater. The ground was covered in a thick layer of phosphorescent moss, casting an eerie, soft green glow. In the very center of the glade stood a single, massive tree, unlike any I had ever seen. Its trunk was as wide as a small building, its branches twisted and gnarled, reaching up like grasping claws towards the sliver of sky visible above. And beneath the tree, nestled amongst its colossal roots, was an opening, a dark, gaping maw like a cave entrance, swallowed by the shadows. A profound sense of ancient power emanated from the glade, a palpable hum in the air. This was it, the source, the heart of the Whisperer's domain. "Oh my God," Mark breathed, his voice barely audible. He looked utterly awestruck, his skepticism finally shattered by the overwhelming presence of the place. The mark on my arm flared, burning hot now, an intense heat radiating from the symbol. It felt like a direct link, a beacon guiding me to this place. And then, from the depths of the opening beneath the ancient tree, a sound drifted out. It was a low, resonant hum, a deep vibration that seemed to come from the very earth itself. It was the guttural sound I'd heard before, but clearer, stronger, like a voice finally coming into its own. And then the words, perfectly clear, undeniably distinct, reverberating through the silent glade. "Jai, you found me, come play." The words hung in the air, a physical presence vibrating through the phosphorescent moss beneath our feet, through the very roots of the ancient trees. My blood ran cold, then surged hot with a primal terror. This wasn't a whisper. This was a declaration. A voice that had been beckoning me from the shadows was now speaking openly, powerfully from the heart of this ancient place. Mark beside me stood frozen, his eyes wide, his jaw slack. The practical mechanic, the logical friend, was utterly awestruck, his face pale with a shock that mirrored my own. I saw the moment his skepticism finally shattered, replaced by a profound, terrifying understanding. Jay, he breathed, his voice barely a whisper, a stark contrast to the resonant hum that still echoed around us. Did you hear that? Yes, I managed, my own voice hoarse, raw. The mark on my arm throbbed, an insistent, burning pulse that felt connected to the booming voice, a physical manifestation of the whisperer's claim. It was an anchor, pulling me inexorably towards that dark opening. The cave entrance beneath the massive tree seemed to pulse, a deeper darkness within the gloom. It wasn't a natural cave. The edges were too smooth, too deliberate, as if carved by something vast and ancient. The air, already cold, grew colder, carrying a faint, earthy scent mixed with something metallic, something vaguely sweet and cloying, like old blood and decaying flowers. My gaze was fixed on the opening. A terrifying magnetic pull drew me forward. My legs felt heavy, yet compelled to move. It was as if every cell in my body was listening to that resonant command, "Come, play." Jay, no! Mark's hand clamped down on my arm, his grip surprisingly strong, yanking me back from the edge of the glade. "We are not going in there. That thing just spoke to us. What is it?" His voice was laced with a desperate urgency, a raw fear I'd never heard from him before. I turned to him, my eyes wide, desperate. "It's calling me, Mark. It's always been calling me. The mark, it's burning." I pulled up my sleeve, revealing the angry red symbol, now throbbing visibly. It looked almost alive, a faint, internal light pulsing beneath my skin. Mark stared at it, his face a mask of horrified fascination. That's not normal, Jay. We need to go. We need to get out of here now, before it does whatever it wants to do." He started to back away slowly, pulling me with him, his eyes darting from the cave entrance to the ancient trees that ringed the glade. He was looking for an escape route, a way out of this nightmare. But the pull was too strong. "It won't let us, Mark," I whispered, my voice thick with a horrifying certainty. "It wants me. It brought me here. We can't just leave." As if to confirm my words, a low, guttural growl rippled from the opening, not angry but deep, resonating. It was a sound of ancient impatience, a clear signal that our presence was noted and our hesitation was not appreciated. The ground trembled faintly beneath our feet. The phosphorescent moss around us seemed to glow brighter, momentarily illuminating the glade with an unearthly green light. Mark froze again, his eyes wide, his breath catching in his throat. He looked at me, then at the cave, then back at me. The fear was palpable on his face, but beneath it I saw a flicker of the stubborn loyalty that defined him. He might be terrified, but he wasn't going to abandon me. "Okay," he said, his voice strained, a desperate attempt at control. "Okay, we're not leaving, but we're not going in there blindly either. We need a plan. What do we know about this thing?" He gripped my arm, not letting go, as if physically tethering me to reality. "The book, Abernathy's book," I stammered, my mind racing through the limited information I had. "It's called the Whisperer, an ancient spirit of the deep woods. It lures people, marks them. It's territorial. It doesn't necessarily harm, but it draws them in to play." "Play?" Mark scoffed, a nervous, almost hysterical laugh escaping him. "This doesn't feel like playtime, Jay. This feels like a trap." The guttural hum from the cave intensified, as if amused by our conversation or perhaps irritated by Mark's dismissive tone. The air around us felt charged, heavy, pressing down on our chests. The sheer antiquity of the glade, the colossal tree, the symbols carved into everything, it was overwhelming. We were standing on sacred ground, or perhaps cursed ground. "We need to be careful," I said, trying to steady my racing heart. Abernathy didn't know much, he just compiled local legends. He said it was fundamentally other, not malicious, but not benevolent either. Great, Mark muttered, pulling out the heavy-duty flashlight from his pack. Its beam cut a stark path through the eerie green glow of the moss, casting long, dancing shadows. So we're dealing with a possibly ancient, possibly non-human entity that wants to play and has marked you, and it lives in a giant tree cave. Fantastic. He adjusted his grip on the axe he'd brought, a tool of practical utility that now looked pitifully small against the enormity of our situation. Look, Jay, I'm with you, but we go in together, and at the first sign of real danger we bolt. No questions asked. Agreed. I nodded, grateful for his steadfastness, for his willingness to face this impossible terror with me. Agreed. With a shared, desperate glance, we began to move slowly, cautiously, towards the opening beneath the ancient tree. Each step felt heavy, like wading through an unseen current. The phosphorescent moss crunched softly under our boots, the only sound apart from our ragged breathing and the low hum emanating from the cave. As we neared the entrance, the chilling scent intensified, metallic and sweet, like something rotting, yet strangely enticing. Mark shone his powerful flashlight beam into the darkness. The beam cut through the gloom, revealing not a jagged, uneven cave wall, but smooth, polished rock. The passage sloped gently downward, curving away into absolute darkness. The air inside was still and heavy, devoid of any natural air current, making it feel utterly sealed off from the living world outside. The walls were covered in the symbols, not carved but etched as if burnt into the very rock, glowing faintly with the same phosphorescent green light as the moss outside. They spiraled down the passage, countless abstract eyes, all seeming to watch us. This isn't natural, Jay, Mark whispered, his voice hushed with awe and dread. This is built. I nodded, unable to speak. The sheer age of the place was overwhelming. This wasn't just a cave. It was a doorway, a threshold to something utterly alien. You are here, the resonant voice hummed again, closer now, seeming to come from the very air around us, from the glowing symbols on the walls. It was in my head, a vibration in my bones, not just an external sound. My marked, come closer, come see. The emphasis on see sent a shiver down my spine. What would we see? What awaited us in the depths of this ancient, living darkness? Mark took a hesitant step forward, then another, his flashlight beam sweeping through the passage. The symbols seemed to pulse in time with the resonant voice, a silent, glowing heartbeat. Stick close, he murmured, his hand going to the large hunting knife strapped to his hip. The axe remained in his pack. I knew he'd be unwilling to use it unless absolutely necessary. We entered the passage, leaving the faint, unearthly glow of the glade behind. The darkness closed in around us, thick and heavy, swallowing the light from Mark's flashlight, making it feel less effective, less reassuring. The only light now came from the softly glowing symbols on the walls, providing just enough illumination to navigate the sloping passage. The air grew even colder, a profound, bone-chilling cold that seemed to suck the warmth from our bodies. I shivered, not just from the cold, but from the sense of immense, ancient power that permeated every inch of this place. The passage continued to descend, twisting and turning, always covered in the glowing, watchful symbols. The hum of the whisperer's voice grew steadier, a constant, low thrumming that resonated deep within my chest, making my own heart beat in rhythm with it. The mark on my arm was now a constant, intense burn, a direct conduit to this entity. "How far does this go?" Mark whispered, his voice tight. "I don't know," I replied, my voice equally strained. I felt a growing sense of claustrophobia, a desperate urge to turn back, but the pull of the mark was too strong, too insistent. I was being led not just by my own curiosity, but by an unseen force. As we descended, the passage widened slightly, eventually opening into a vast, cavernous space. Mark's flashlight beam struggled to penetrate the immense darkness, revealing only hints of impossible size and impossible structures. This wasn't a natural cavern. This was a chamber carved from the very earth, its ceiling lost in the blackness, its walls adorned with the same glowing symbols, but here they were larger, more intricate, forming vast, swirling murals of light on the dark stone. In the center of the chamber, a colossal, glowing structure rose from the floor. It was difficult to make out its exact shape in the dim, green light, but it seemed to be a series of interconnected, root-like tendrils, pulsing with a soft, internal luminescence. It looked organic, yet entirely alien, like the heart of a giant, subterranean tree. And surrounding this central core, scattered across the cavern floor, were things. Shadows, indistinct in the eerie light, but undeniably forms. They were motionless, like sculptures or petrified figures. As Mark's flashlight beam swept across them, I saw them more clearly. They were human-like, or had been. Twisted, distorted forms, their bodies desiccated, shriveled, their skin like dried leather stretched over bone. They were positioned in various postures, some kneeling, some slumped, some standing upright, their arms outstretched as if reaching for the glowing core. Their faces, what remained of them, were frozen in expressions of awe or agony, or perhaps a terrifying mixture of both. Their eyes, empty sockets, seemed to stare into the eternal darkness. My breath hitched in my throat. Mark gasped, a strangled sound of horror. "Oh my God, Jay," he whispered, his voice trembling. What are these?" "The marked," I breathed, the realization dawning on me with a sickening lurch. "Those who came to play." A low, resonant chuckle rippled through the chamber, vibrating through the glowing symbols, through the colossal core, through our very bones. It was a sound of ancient satisfaction, of chilling amusement. "They saw," the whisperer's voice filled the chamber, no longer just a hum, but a symphony of voices, overlapping, intertwining, yet always centered on that one deep, resonant tone. "They found, they stayed, they played, as you will, my marked, as you will." The word struck me like a physical blow. This was the game. This was the play. To be drawn in, to see, to be consumed by whatever ancient power resided here until nothing was left but a dried husk, a silent testament to its terrible allure. Fear, cold and absolute, enveloped me. This wasn't an invitation to interact, it was an invitation to surrender. "No," Mark growled, his fear turning to defiant anger. He raised his flashlight, sweeping the beam around the chamber, focusing it on the central glowing core as if trying to identify an enemy. "No, Jay, we're leaving, now." He grabbed my arm, his grip like a vice, and started to pull me back towards the passage we'd entered. But the whisperer's voice deepened, hardening. "You interrupt, small one, you do not understand. He is mine, he is called, he will see, he will find, he will play." As the last word echoed, the chamber itself seemed to shift. The glowing symbols on the walls pulsed brighter, faster, casting dizzying patterns of light and shadow. The desiccated figures on the floor seemed to stir, their shadows lengthening, twisting, as if trying to reach for us. The central core intensified its luminescence, a blinding green light that pulsed with an incredible energy. A searing pain erupted on my right arm. The mark flared, burning with an agony that made me cry out, a sharp, white-hot fire that seemed to consume my flesh. My knees buckled. Mark yelled, trying to support me, but the pain was too intense. I crumpled to the ground, clutching my arm, gasping. And then from the central glowing core, a shape began to emerge. It wasn't a solid form, but a swirling mass of green light and shadow, coalescing, shifting like smoke given form, yet possessing an undeniable presence. It was impossibly tall, slender, its limbs elongating, twisting, forming into something vaguely humanoid, yet utterly alien. Its head was indistinct, a vortex of light and shadow, but in its center, a single, glowing symbol formed, the jagged spiral, the abstract eye, my mark. It was the Whisperer, manifest. It extended a long, skeletal arm, not of bone, but of swirling energy, directly towards me. The glowing symbol in its hand pulsed with a terrifying intensity, mirroring the agony on my arm. "You are mine, marked one," its voice thrummed directly in my mind now, bypassing my ears, echoing in the deepest chambers of my consciousness. "You will come, you will stay, you will become beautiful." The word beautiful was laced with a chilling, ancient hunger, a promise of a transformation I instinctively recoiled from with every fiber of my being. Mark, seeing the entity, seeing the agony on my face, let out a roar of defiance. He released me, pulling the heavy-duty axe from his pack with a swift, desperate motion. "Get away from him, you thing," he bellowed, his voice cracking with raw terror, yet filled with a desperate courage. He lunged forward, raising the axe, aiming for the swirling form of the Whisperer. The entity simply tilted its indistinct head, and a low, amused hum rippled through the chamber. It didn't move, didn't flinch. As Mark's axe swung down, a ripple of green light shot out from the Whisperer's form. It didn't hit Mark, but it created an invisible wall, a shield of pure energy that shimmered and pulsed. The axe, with all of Mark's strength behind it, struck the shield with a jarring clang and then simply bounced off. Mark reeled back, stunned, the axe flying from his grasp to clatter harmlessly on the phosphorescent moss. He stared at the shimmering barrier, his face aghast. This was beyond anything he could have imagined. The Whisperer's glowing form flowed closer to me, its outstretched arm still pointing, drawing me in. The pain in my arm was unbearable, but now it was mixed with a strange, intoxicating warmth, a sense of being pulled, absorbed into something vast and ancient. I felt my will struggling, fighting against an overwhelming urge to simply surrender, to let it take me. "He is not part of this, Whisperer," I choked out, fighting through the pain and the alluring pull. "Leave him alone." The entity paused, its glowing eye symbol seeming to focus on me. Its voice, still in my mind, was softer, almost cajoling. "He interferes, my marked. He resists. He does not understand the gift, the beauty." As it spoke, a thin tendril of glowing green light detached from its form and snaked towards Mark. It was quick, graceful, yet utterly terrifying. Mark, still reeling from his failed attack, didn't even have time to react. The tendril wrapped around his ankle, glowing with an unearthly light. Mark screamed, not a cry of pain, but a scream of pure, visceral horror. His body stiffened, then began to convulse. His eyes rolled back in his head, his mouth open in a silent rictus of terror. The tendril glowed brighter, and Mark's form began to wither. His skin, in seconds, seemed to dry, to shrink, to turn a pale, papery gray. His muscles tightened, pulling his limbs into unnatural angles. His clothes, once loose, now hung baggily on his rapidly shrinking frame. He was being desiccated, drained, transformed into one of the silent, horrifying figures that littered the chamber. "Mark!" I screamed, a raw, desperate cry. The agony in my arm was forgotten, replaced by a surge of frantic adrenaline, a burning rage. My friend, my loyal, skeptical friend, was being consumed, turned into a mummified husk before my very eyes. "Stop it! Leave him alone!" I tried to scramble forward to reach him, to do anything, but the Whisperer's power held me, pinning me to the moss-covered floor. The entity's glowing eye seemed to regard Mark's transformation with a detached, ancient curiosity. "He resists the invitation," its voice hummed, still calm, still resonant, but with a hint of something colder, more final. "He breaks the silence. He denies the play. He will become a watcher, a silent guest." Mark's transformation was nearly complete. His face, frozen in a silent scream, was now a dried mask. His body had become a rigid, petrified form, indistinguishable from the other figures in the chamber. He was gone, consumed. And then, as the last vestige of life drained from him, his skin became covered in a faint green phosphorescence, identical to the moss on the ground, identical to the glow that emanated from the Whisperer itself. His empty eye sockets seemed to glow faintly with an internal light. He was now one of them, a permanent, silent resident of the ancient glade. A wave of crushing despair, a suffocating grief, washed over me. Mark was dead, because of me, because he had come with me, because he had tried to protect me. My vision blurred with tears, but even through the haze I could see the Whisperer, its glowing form pulsing, its single, swirling eye fixed on me. Its outstretched hand, still pointing, pulsed with an even greater intensity, drawing me, pulling me, offering me the same terrible beauty. "Now, my marked," its voice resonated, a dark invitation, a final summons. "There is no one to resist, no one to deny. Come, see, be beautiful." The pain in my arm was unbearable, but the hypnotic pull was even stronger. My body felt heavy, yet light, as if ready to dissolve. My mind screamed in protest, but a terrible, insidious calm began to settle over me, a resignation, a surrender. The Whisperer's power was absolute. I was just a human, a fragile mortal against an ancient, unknowable force. My eyes drifted to Mark's petrified form. He stood frozen, eternally vigilant, one of the silent watchers. A fresh wave of fury, of righteous anger, flared within me, momentarily overriding the seductive pull of the Whisperer. No, not like this. I wouldn't become another silent guest. I wouldn't surrender, not after what it had done to Mark. Summoning a strength I didn't know I possessed, I screamed. It was a raw, primal scream of rage and grief and absolute defiance, tearing from my lungs, reverberating through the vast chamber. The Whisperer paused, its glowing form flickering slightly, as if surprised by my unexpected outburst. The resonant hum in my mind wavered. "You resist still," its voice, now tinged with a hint of ancient annoyance, echoed. Foolish mortal, your defiance is quaint but futile. You killed him, I shrieked, tears streaming down my face, but my eyes fixed on the entity with a burning hatred. You took my friend, you will not take me. As I spoke, the mark on my arm, which had been burning with agony, suddenly shifted. The pain remained, but it changed. It wasn't just an external fire. It felt like an internal struggle, a battle being waged deep within my flesh, within my very spirit. The symbol began to pulse erratically, violently, no longer just receiving the whisperer's call, but pushing back, vibrating with a raw, chaotic energy. The whisperer's glowing form flickered again, more intensely this time. Its single-eye symbol seemed to narrow, its hum deepening to a low, frustrated growl. The mark it resists? Impossible. You are chosen. You are bound. Something was happening to the mark. It wasn't just a simple symbol anymore. It was alive, a channel, a conduit, and my defiance, my rage, was somehow feeding into it, twisting its purpose. A thought, cold and clear, cut through my grief and fear. The book said the mark wasn't permanent, that it faded. But mine hadn't. It had grown stronger. What if the mark wasn't just its claim, but my connection? What if my resistance was somehow altering its nature? You want me to play? I rasped, struggling to my feet, my body shaking, but my resolve hardening. Then let's play, but not your games, my game. The whisperer's form rippled violently. Tendrils of green light shot out from it, lashing at the air, stirring the dust from the petrified figures. The entire chamber thrummed with a raw, ancient power, no longer just a hum, but a roar. You do not dictate terms, marked one, its voice thundered, no longer cajoling, but filled with ancient fury. You are a vessel, you are a prize, you are mine. As it roared, the glowing symbol on my arm flared with a blinding, white-hot intensity. The pain was excruciating, as if my very skin was being torn apart. But with the pain came a surge of raw power, a primal energy that erupted from within me, surging through the mark. A wave of pure, concentrated light born from the symbol on my arm exploded outwards from my body. It wasn't the green phosphorescence of the glade, but a pure, blinding white, crackling with an unseen energy. The light struck the whisperer's swirling form. The entity shrieked. It wasn't a roar, but a high-pitched, piercing shriek of pure, unadulterated agony, a sound that seemed to tear at the very fabric of the chamber. Its glowing form recoiled violently, shrinking, flickering, losing cohesion. The symbols on the walls dimmed, then flickered out entirely, plunging the vast chamber into near total darkness, save for the faint, erratic pulse of the central core. The white light radiating from my arm subsided, leaving me gasping, drained, but oddly exhilarated. The searing pain in my arm was gone, replaced by a dull ache, but the mark still throbbed, now with a deep, pulsating rhythm that felt connected to me. The whisperer, its form reduced to a much smaller, flickering vortex of green light and shadow, retreated quickly, dissolving back into the central core, which also dimmed significantly, becoming almost invisible in the darkness. The ancient hum that filled the chamber vanished, replaced by an eerie, heavy silence. The figures on the floor, including Mark's petrified form, remained motionless, silent, but the threat was gone, for now. I stood there trembling, utterly spent but alive. I had pushed back, I had resisted, and somehow my mark had become a weapon. My eyes, now adjusting to the gloom, drifted to Mark's petrified form, Grief, sharp and agonizing, pierced through the adrenaline. He was gone. He had died for me. My defiance, my brief victory, felt hollow, utterly worthless without him. I stumbled towards his motionless figure, my legs weak, my body shaking uncontrollably. I reached out a trembling hand, touching his cold, papery skin. He was perfectly preserved, a silent, glowing monument to a friendship tragically cut short. Tears streamed down my face again, hot and heavy. "Mark," I whispered, my voice choked with despair. "I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry." The silence of the chamber was absolute, profound. The ancient glade had claimed another, but this time it hadn't claimed me. I stayed there for what felt like an eternity, kneeling beside Mark's petrified form, my hand resting on his cold shoulder, mourning my friend. The anger slowly faded, replaced by a deep, aching emptiness. I was alone again, truly alone. But this time I carried a terrible, horrifying knowledge and a terrifying power I didn't understand. Eventually, the chill of the chamber began to penetrate my exhaustion. I knew I couldn't stay. The Whisperer was dormant, wounded perhaps, but not gone, and I was still marked, still called. The battle was over, but the war was not. I forced myself to stand, my muscles protesting, every fiber of my being screaming for rest. I took one last, long look at Mark's silent form, etching his sacrifice into my memory. He had shown me courage, loyalty, and a love that transcended logic. I wouldn't forget him. Turning away was the hardest thing I'd ever done. Each step away from him felt like a betrayal, but I had to survive. I had to understand what had happened to me and to ensure no one else suffered Mark's fate. I made my way back to the passage, guided by the faint, residual phosphorescence on the walls. The symbols, though still visible, no longer glowed. The eerie silence persisted. The metallic sweet scent of decay still lingered. The climb out was arduous, a grueling ascent fueled by adrenaline and grief. My body ached, my head pounded, and my heart was heavy with a profound loss. I emerged from the cave entrance, blinking in the green, unearthly glow of the glade. The massive tree still loomed, its branches like grasping claws. The phosphorescent moss still pulsed with its soft, internal light, but the overwhelming sense of ancient power, of watchful presence, had diminished. The glade felt empty, scarred. I walked to the edge of the glade, retrieved Mark's abandoned axe, and stuffed it grimly into my pack. I also picked up Mark's powerful flashlight, its beam now a stark, cold comfort. I didn't look back at the cave entrance. I couldn't. I pushed my way back through the curtain of ferns, back into the older, denser forest. The ancient carvings on the trees and rocks seemed to stare at me, silent witnesses to what had transpired. My pace was slow, stumbling, my mind numb with shock and exhaustion. I don't know how long I walked. Hours. The sun began its slow descent, painting the canopy in streaks of purple and orange. I moved on instinct, pushing one foot in front of the other, my senses dulled by grief, yet still hyper-aware of every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves. The forest, though quieter, still felt ominous. The whisper might be temporarily defeated, but its domain was vast. As darkness began to fall, I found a small, sheltered alcove beneath an overhang of rock. It offered a modicum of protection, a place to rest my battered body. I didn't bother setting up a tent. I just slumped against the rock, pulling my sleeping bag around me like a shroud. I stared at the mark on my arm. It was no longer glowing, no longer burning, but it was still there, a faint, angry red, pulsing with a slow, steady rhythm that felt like my own heartbeat. It had saved me. It had allowed me to fight back, but it had also been the reason Mark was gone. What was it? What had it become? What had I become? Sleep, when it finally came, was fitful and haunted. Dreams of Mark's screaming face, of the whisperer's swirling form, of the glowing, empty eye. But amidst the terror there was a new element. A strange, almost primal sensation of power, of something stirring within me, connected to the Mark, connected to the forest. I woke with a gasp, drenched in cold sweat, but with a new clarity. I had to understand this. I had to learn what this Mark truly was, what I had done, and what it meant for my future. The Whisperer was still out there, its ancient hunger unfulfilled, and I was the only one who had survived its game. I was the one who had resisted, who had fought back. The sun was just beginning to touch the highest branches of the trees, painting the forest in soft, golden light. A new day, a new beginning, but a terrifying one. I packed my minimal gear, my movements stiff and sore. My backpack felt lighter without Mark's supplies, a stark reminder of my loss. I was alone, but I was changed. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach, but it was tempered by a grim determination. I retraced my steps, slowly making my way out of the deeper woods. The journey was a blur of aching muscles and silent grief. The carved symbols on the trees no longer filled me with awe or dread, but with a strange sense of familiarity, a grim understanding. They were a language, and I had unknowingly begun to learn its alphabet. It took me another full day to reach the outer trails, and then finally the small, remote parking lot. Mark's SUV still sat there, a forlorn monument to a failed expedition. My own truck was long gone. I couldn't just leave Mark's vehicle. I had to secure it, report him missing. But what could I say? He'd gone into the Blackwood with me, and I'd come out alone, bearing a strange mark and an impossible story. No one would believe me. They'd think I'd gone mad or worse. I decided to call his family from a payphone in the nearest town, explaining that he'd gone off-grid on a solo backpacking trip, something he sometimes did and hadn't checked in. It was a flimsy lie, but it bought me time. I left his vehicle for them to retrieve, knowing it would be a painful reminder. I hitchhiked, then took a series of buses, slowly making my way back to my apartment. The familiar streets, the mundane sounds of traffic, the indifferent faces of strangers, it all felt utterly alien. I was a ghost moving through a world that no longer made sense. Back in my apartment, the walls felt thin, the silence suffocating. I locked the door, drew the blinds, and sat in the quiet, staring at the mark on my arm. It had faded slightly, no longer angry red, but a subtle, almost invisible tracing on my skin. Yet it pulsed with a faint, steady rhythm, a constant reminder of the ancient glade, of the whisperer of Mark. My life was irrevocably altered. I couldn't go back to normal. The whispers still echoed in the periphery of my hearing, no longer terrifying calls, but subtle undertones like distant music I was just beginning to discern. The dreams, though still vivid, were no longer just nightmares. They were also flashes of understanding, glimpses of patterns, of connections I couldn't yet grasp. I spent days, then weeks, immersing myself in every piece of lore, mythology, and obscure science I could find. I revisited Abernathy's book, reading it with new eyes, searching for any detail I might have missed. I scoured academic papers on ancient civilizations, forgotten languages, even quantum physics, grasping at anything that might offer an explanation. I learned about energy transference, about non-physical entities, about the concept of ley lines and earth energies. I stumbled upon references to symbols used in ancient cultures for spiritual binding, for channeling power, for warding off malevolent spirits. The jagged spiral, the abstract eye, it appeared in surprisingly diverse contexts, always hinting at a connection to unseen forces, to ancient knowledge. The more I researched, the more I understood that the Whisperer wasn't just a ghost story. It was an entity rooted in something far older, far more fundamental. It was an expression of the Blackwood itself, a guardian, a consumer, a being that thrived on connection and energy. And my marca, it wasn't just a simple invitation. It was a conduit, a resonance. It allowed the Whisperer to reach me, but it also allowed me to reach it. And in that terrifying moment in the glade, when I had resisted, when I had poured my raw emotion into the mark, I had inadvertently tapped into its power, redirected it, and pushed back. But that power came at a cost, Mark's life. A new purpose began to form in my mind, a grim, unyielding resolve. I couldn't undo what had happened to Mark, but I could prevent it from happening to anyone else. I had to understand this. I had to understand this. The realization settled deep within me, a cold, hard stone amidst the swirling chaos of grief and fear. My life had shattered, but in its fragmentation, a new, terrifying path had emerged. I was no longer just a victim, no longer merely Jay, the quiet outdoor enthusiast. I was something else, something touched, something marked, something irrevocably bound to the ancient darkness of the Blackwood. And that binding, I now knew, carried a nascent, bewildering power. My apartment became my new wilderness. I holed up, retreating from the world with a ferocity born of trauma and a desperate need for answers. Friends called, worried. My phone buzzed with texts from Mark's family, asking if I'd heard from him, their voices growing increasingly strained. Each unanswered call, each ignored message was a fresh stab of guilt. I couldn't face them. How could I explain? How could I tell them their son, their brother, had been turned into a glowing statue by an ancient forest entity? They would never believe me, and the burden of that lie, that impossible truth, was too heavy to carry. So I isolated myself, letting their worry morph into frustration, then quiet despair. It was easier that way for now. My research became an all-consuming obsession. I spent every waking hour glued to my laptop, surrounded by printouts, library books, and obscure digital archives. Abernathy's book, once a source of terrifying legend, was now my primer, my Rosetta Stone. I reread it countless times, highlighting every phrase, every nuanced description of the Whisperer. Abernathy had spoken of ancient ones, earth spirits, and sentient groves. I cross-referenced these terms with every piece of folklore I could find, from indigenous legends of forest guardians to European tales of dryads and ancient, consuming deities. The Blackwood was a unique ecosystem, an anomaly of old-growth forest in a largely developed region. Its geological history, I discovered, was even more intriguing. It sat atop a confluence of ancient fault lines, a place where the Earth's energies were said to be unusually strong, almost palpable. Geologists called them telluric currents or ley lines, theories often dismissed as pseudoscience, but which suddenly held a terrifying resonance for me. What if the Whisperer wasn't just a spirit, but a manifestation of these very energies, a consciousness born from the ancient Earth itself? My focus shifted from merely identifying the Whisperer to understanding the mechanism of its power, and more importantly, the nature of the mark. The jagged spiral, the abstract eye, it wasn't just a symbol. It was a language. I found it in ancient cave paintings, in obscure alchemical texts, in the patterns of sacred geometry. Always, it was associated with connection, with channeling, with a bridge between worlds. And then there was the power. The surge of blinding white light, the raw energy that had erupted from me in the glade, repelling the whisperer. It had come from the mark, from my will, from my despair and rage. How? Why? I began to experiment, cautiously, tentatively at first. I would sit for hours, staring at the faded symbol on my arm, trying to focus my mind. I tried to remember the feeling of that moment in the glade, the overwhelming anger, the defiant refusal to surrender. I closed my eyes, picturing the whisperer, its swirling form, its terrifying presence. Nothing happened, or so I thought. But slowly, subtly, things began to change. The distant music of the whispers grew clearer. It wasn't always a direct voice, but a tapestry of sensations. The rustle of leaves that wasn't there, the faint scent of damp earth and pine, a shift in the air pressure, a resonance in the very floorboards of my apartment. It was like tuning into a frequency I had never perceived before. The blackwood, even miles away, was still reaching for me, but now I was reaching back. One evening, staring at a schematic of a supposed ley line network, I felt a peculiar tingle in my arm, a faint echo of the intense burning ID felt in the glade. I focused on it, trying to trace its origin to understand its nature. I imagined it as an energy, a current flowing through my arm. And then, without consciously willing it, the overhead light in my apartment flickered, dimmed, and then surged back to full brightness. My heart leaped into my throat. I stared at the light, then at my arm. Was that me? Was it a coincidence? I tried again. I closed my eyes, focused on the mark, focused on the desire for the light to dim. Nothing. I tried to focus on anger, on defiance. Still nothing. Frustration bubbled up inside me. I slammed my fist lightly on the desk, exhaling sharply. And then the light flickered again, violently, the bulb buzzing. It wasn't conscious control, it was emotion. Raw, untamed emotion channeled through the mark. This realization was both terrifying and exhilarating. The mark wasn't just a beacon, it was a conduit for power, a direct link to something. And my emotions, particularly strong ones like anger, fear, or profound determination, seemed to be the trigger. My dreams, too, began to change. They were no longer mere nightmares of being hunted. They became immersive experiences, virtual journeys into the blackwood. I would walk through the glade, the phosphorescent moss glowing underfoot, and the petrified figures would seem to watch me, their empty sockets filled with a faint internal light. Mark's figure was always there, a silent, heartbreaking sentinel. But the whisper itself, though often a presence, rarely manifested in its full form. Instead, I would see patterns, flows of green light moving through the roots of the ancient tree, feeling the deep hum of the earth itself. I was beginning to perceive the blackwood not just as a collection of trees, but as a vast, living organism interconnected by unseen energies. And the whisperer, it was the heart of that organism, its consciousness. Through these dreams, I started to hear the whisperer differently. Its resonant hum was no longer just a summons, it was a conversation, albeit one-sided, vast, and utterly alien. It was communicating through sensations, through patterns of energy, through abstract concepts that slowly, painstakingly, I began to translate. It spoke of ancientness, of consumption, of growth, of integration. It spoke of beauty not as aesthetic appeal, but as a state of perfect stasis, of ultimate connection, of being absorbed into the greater whole. Mark and the others were beautiful because they had surrendered, become part of its eternal consciousness. And I, the one who resisted, was an anomaly, a disruption, a new variable in its ancient game. This growing understanding came with a heavy price. My physical appearance, already gaunt from the first encounter, continued to deteriorate. I ate little, slept less, driven by an insatiable hunger for knowledge. My eyes were perpetually bloodshot, rimmed with dark circles. My skin was pale, almost translucent, but beneath the weariness there was a strange intensity, a coiled energy. The mark on my arm, though faded, seemed to draw energy from me, yet also fuel this transformation. I was changing not into a dried husk, but into something else, something attuned, something connected. One evening, while trying to decipher a particularly cryptic passage in an old book on shamanistic rituals, I felt a sudden, sharp pain in my chest. I gasped, clutching at my shirt. It wasn't a heart attack, but a searing internal burn, as if something was being rewired, reformed. It lasted only a few seconds, leaving me trembling and disoriented, but when I recovered, I found my senses incredibly heightened. The hum of the refrigerator was a dull roar. The distant traffic outside was a cacophony. I could hear the faint drip of a leaky faucet from a neighboring apartment, the low thrum of the building's electrical system, the subtle shift of air currents. It was overwhelming, a flood of sensory input I couldn't filter. It took hours of forced concentration, of willing myself to ignore the peripheral noise to regain some semblance of normal hearing. This was what the mark was doing. It was opening me up, enhancing my connection to the unseen world, to the very fabric of existence. It was making me more than human, or perhaps less. My purpose solidified. I wouldn't just understand the whisperer, I would stop it. Not by brute force, which was clearly futile, but by understanding its nature, by learning its language, by mastering the power of the mark. I would find a way to sever its influence, to break its hold on the Blackwood, to prevent it from ever claiming another life. Mark's sacrifice would not be in vain. I started to train, not physically, but mentally. I meditated for hours, trying to control the flow of energy I felt stirring within me, connected to the mark. I focused on emotions, trying to harness their raw power to direct it, not just lash out instinctively. It was like trying to catch smoke, intangible and elusive, but I was determined. I revisited Abernathy's notes on the symbols again, this time with a new perspective. The jagged spiral and abstract eye weren't just decorative. They were, I theorized, components of a complex sigil, a form of ancient programming language. The spiral represented flow, energy, connection. The eye represented awareness, perception, binding. Together, they described the whisper's method of operation, drawing you in, making you aware, and then binding you. But what if the symbols could be reversed or repurposed? I began sketching, copying the symbols, trying to draw them from memory, from intuition. I experimented with adding lines, subtracting elements, rotating them. It felt absurd, like a child scribbling, but something deep within me, guided by the mark's subtle pulses, told me I was on the right track. The whispers in my head became more insistent, more complex. They weren't always direct commands, but often felt like echoes, memories, or even glimpses into the whisperer's own vast consciousness. I saw flashes of ancient forests, of towering trees that predated humanity, of beings that moved through the earth like shadows. And within these glimpses, I started to see something else, a vulnerability. The whisper drew its power from the earth, from the ancient energies of the Blackwood. It consumed life, but it also sustained the life around it in its own twisted way. It was a symbiotic predator, a guardian that demanded a terrible toll. But it also seemed bound to the land, tethered to specific nexus points like the ancient glade. Its power was immense, but perhaps not infinite, and certainly not ubiquitous. It was strongest at its source. My plan began to form, chillingly clear. I had to go back, not to fight it directly, not to destroy it, for I doubted I could or even should, but to sever the connection, to free myself and potentially others from its grasp. I had to go to the heart of its power, to the ancient glade, and use the mark itself to break the bond. This was no longer just about survival. It was about vengeance for Mark and about preventing this ancient terror from ever reaching beyond its self-imposed confines again. I spent another month in this state of feverish preparation, both mental and physical. I pushed my body, forced myself to eat, to exercise, to regain some semblance of strength. I needed to be resilient, sharp, ready for whatever awaited me. The mark on my arm became a constant companion, a faint pulse, a silent reminder of my purpose. It no longer burned with agony, but with a controlled internal warmth. My enhanced senses became more manageable. I learned to filter out the overwhelming noise, to focus on specific frequencies. I could now feel the subtle vibrations in the ground, the shifts in air currents, the distant echoes of wildlife even miles away. It was like living with a permanent, low-level hum in my perception, a constant awareness of the world's hidden energies. One afternoon, a knock came at my door. I froze, my heart pounding. I hadn't opened the door for weeks, except to retrieve the occasional food delivery. Who could it be? My friends had given up. Mark's family would have called the police by now. The knock came again, firmer this time. "Jay, are you in there?" It was a woman's voice, familiar. "Jay, it's Emily." Emily, Mark's sister. My stomach clenched. I hadn't seen her since before all this started. She was a few years younger than Mark, a bright, fiery woman with an artist's soul and her brother's fierce loyalty. I hesitated. Could I face her? Could I maintain the lie? The door rattled slightly, as if she was trying the handle. "Jay, I know you're in there. I've been calling and texting. Mom and Dad are worried sick. The police said they found Mark's car at the Blackwood parking lot, unlocked, with all his gear still inside. They've started a search, but they haven't found anything." Her voice broke, a raw, painful crack that tore at my heart. "Jay, please, just tell me what happened. What did you two do out there?" The guilt was a physical weight crushing me. I couldn't pretend anymore. I couldn't let her suffer in the dark. Taking a deep breath, I slowly unlatched the locks and opened the door a crack. Emily stood there, her face drawn and pale, her eyes red-rimmed from crying. Her usually vibrant red hair was disheveled, her clothes rumpled. But the moment she saw me, her eyes widened in shock, then narrowed with concern. "Jay, oh my God, look at you," she breathed, her voice a mix of relief and alarm. "What happened? You look like you've been through hell." I opened the door fully, stepping back into the dim apartment. "Come in, Emily." She stepped inside, her gaze sweeping over the chaotic apartment, the piles of books, the maps, the research scattered everywhere, her brow furrowed. "What is all this, Jay?" I closed the door, leaning against it, my gaze fixed on her. "It's complicated, Em. Something happened to Mark, something I can barely explain." I sat her down on the couch amidst the papers. I chose my words carefully, trying to find a way to tell her the impossible truth without sounding completely insane. I started with the Blackwood, the strange silence, the whispers. I told her about the mark, showing her the faded symbol on my arm. She listened, her expression shifting from skepticism to disbelief, then to a dawning horror that mirrored Mark's own. When I spoke of the ancient glade, the glowing cave, and the desiccated figures, her hands clenched into fists. When I finally reached the part about Mark, about his brave, futile attempt to protect me, and his terrible transformation, Emily's face crumpled. Silent tears streamed down her cheeks, but she didn't scream, didn't yell. She just stared at me, her eyes filled with an unbearable grief, mixed with a chilling, desperate understanding. The sheer weight of my conviction, the haunted look in my eyes, the impossible details, slowly began to break through her rational mind. You mean he's gone," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "He's one of those things." I nodded, my own throat tight with unshed tears. "He is, Emily. I tried to stop it. He saved my life." She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. I sat beside her, not knowing what to say, what to do. My own grief, so long suppressed, surged to the surface, mixing with an agonizing guilt. After a long time, she lifted her head, her eyes red and swollen, but now filled with a fierce, burning light. "This whisperer," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "What is it? And what do you mean you fought back? How did you get out?" I explained about the mark, about its dual nature as a conduit and a weapon, about my desperate surge of defiance. I told her about my growing understanding of the Whisperer as a manifestation of the Blackwood's ancient energies, and my belief that I could use the mark to sever the connection. She listened intently, absorbing every word, every impossible detail. She was an artist, accustomed to seeing the world through different lenses, open to abstract concepts. And she had loved her brother with an intensity that transcended logic. For her, the impossibility of my story was less important than the truth of her brother's fate. "So you're saying," she said slowly, wiping her face with the back of her hand, "that you have this power now, and you're going back there to try and break it?" I nodded. "I have to, Emily. I can't leave Mark like that, and I can't let this thing continue to exist, drawing people in, turning them into that." She looked at the mark on my arm, then at my face. A spark of her brother's stubborn loyalty, mixed with her own artistic perception, flickered in her eyes. "You're not going alone this time, Jay." My head snapped up. "Emily, no, you can't. This isn't your fight. It's far too dangerous. You saw what happened to Mark." "Exactly," she countered, her voice firm, unwavering. "I saw what happened to Mark, and I heard what you said. You're talking about an ancient, sentient entity that can drain the life out of people. And you, a regular guy, are going to go back into its lair, armed with a vague understanding of energy and a weird glowing tattoo. You need help, Jay." "I'm not a regular guy anymore, Emily," I said, my voice quiet, but with an edge of something new, something tempered by my experiences. "And I've learned things. I'm not going in blind." "And that's supposed to reassure me," she scoffed, a ghost of her old humor flashing in her eyes, quickly replaced by grim determination. "Number Mark went with you because he loved you, because he was your friend. I'm going with you because he was my brother, and because you're all I have left who knows what happened to him." Her gaze hardened. "Besides, Jay, you're an engineer. You think logically, systematically. I'm an artist. I see patterns, connections, subtle energies. I spent years studying symbols, ancient mythologies, the subconscious mind. You said yourself the Whisperer communicates through abstract concepts. Maybe I can help you understand it, translate it, perceive things you can't." Her words struck a chord. I had been struggling with the Whisperer's alien communication. My analytical mind was good at breaking things down, but perhaps not at grasping the subtle, symbolic language of a forest entity. Emily's artistic sensibility might indeed be an invaluable asset. But the danger, I remembered Mark's petrified face, the horror in his eyes. I couldn't risk Emily. "Emily, please, I can't bear the thought of losing you too," I pleaded, my voice raw with renewed grief. She reached out, her hand resting gently on my arm near the faded mark. "You won't lose me, Jay. We're going to get answers. And if there's a way to bring Mark back, or at least give him peace, we're going to find it, together." Her grip tightened. "I'm not asking, Jay. I'm coming." Her resolve was as unyielding as Mark's had been, and just as with Mark, a faint, fragile hope flickered within me. I was still grieving, still terrified, but the thought of facing this alone again was almost unbearable. Emily, with her sharp mind and artistic intuition, might just be the partner I needed. She understood the power of symbols, the language of the subconscious, the intangible connections that lay beneath the surface of reality. Okay, I finally said, the word a weary acceptance, but also a new vow. Okay, Emily, but we have to be prepared, more prepared than last time, and we go by my rules. We don't engage unless absolutely necessary. We observe, we understand, and if things get too dangerous, we pull back, agreed. She nodded, a grim smile touching her lips. Agreed, and I have some ideas about those symbols of yours. She gestured to the scattered papers around us. Let's get to work. And so, my solitude ended, replaced by a new, shared mission. Emily, grieving but resilient, threw herself into the research with a fierce determination. Where my approach had been analytical, hers was intuitive. She saw connections I'd missed, deciphered nuances in Abernathy's poetic prose that my scientific mind had dismissed as metaphor. She brought fresh perspectives to the symbols. We spent hours sketching, analyzing, and meditating on their forms. She argued that the jagged spiral, while representing connection, could also be interpreted as a labyrinth, a pathway, or even a cyclical journey. The abstract eye, she suggested, wasn't just about binding, but also about perception, about revealing. What if, she proposed, the symbols contained not just the whisperer's command, but also the key to understanding and perhaps controlling its power? We delved deeper into comparative mythology, seeking parallels between the whisperer and other ancient deities of consumption and transformation. We found references to figures that were neither good nor evil, but fundamental forces of nature, demanding sacrifice, yet also providing a strange form of balance. This only strengthened my conviction. The Whisperer wasn't a demon to be banished, but an ancient entity to be understood and, if possible, negotiated with, or at least redirected. Emily, with her artistic eye, helped me visualize the energy flows. She encouraged me to think of the mark not just as a static symbol, but as a living sigil capable of channeling different intentions. She even found some obscure texts on sympathetic magic, where symbols were used to influence reality by creating a resonant frequency. This was similar to my own vague understanding of tapping into the mark's power through emotion, but she gave it structure, context. Our training regimen shifted. We practiced mental exercises together, trying to heighten our senses, to attune ourselves to the subtle energies of the world. Emily, while not possessing the mark, was surprisingly perceptive. Her artistic sensitivity made her acutely aware of shifts in atmosphere, faint tremors, and subtle hums that my more analytical mind might initially dismiss. She was learning to feel the blackwood even from afar through my descriptions and her own intuition. I also worked on controlling my emotional triggers. I couldn't afford to have a surge of uncontrolled power simply because I was angry or scared. I needed precision. Emily, with her understanding of emotional intelligence, helped me identify my triggers, to practice centering myself, to learn to summon specific emotions and channel them consciously into the mark. It was like learning to play a new, complex instrument. The mark, I discovered, responded best to focused intent, amplified by a strong, clear emotion. We acquired more specialized gear. This time our focus was less on survival and more on interaction with the unknown. We brought advanced sensory equipment, a high-sensitivity audio recorder to capture any sonic phenomena, a thermal camera to detect unusual heat signatures, and electromagnetic field EMF detectors to identify energy fluctuations. Emily, with her background in photography, packed specialized cameras for capturing any visual oddities. She even brought a selection of artists' charcoals and thick paper, insisting that drawing the symbols ourselves might deepen our connection to them. As we prepared, the Blackwood continued to call, but now its voice was different. The whispers were no longer just a terrifying summons. They were a constant, resonant background hum in my awareness, like a complex score, filled with ancient stories, abstract patterns, and a strange, profound knowledge I was slowly beginning to decipher. My dreams were vivid, intricate tapestries of the forest, showing me pathways of energy, hidden groves, and ancient root structures that stretched deep into the earth. I was no longer just experiencing the Blackwood's pull, I was beginning to understand its language. The plan was refined. We wouldn't go directly to the glade. We would approach it slowly, carefully, setting up a base camp some distance away. We would use the sensory equipment to monitor the glade to try and detect the whisper's activity from a safe distance. Our goal was to map its energy signature to understand its patterns before making any direct approach. Emily also insisted on bringing some personal items for Mark. A small, carefully selected collection of photographs, a favorite book, a small, polished stone he'd always carried. "If we can't bring him back, Jay," she said, her voice soft but resolute, "we can at least bring him to him. A final gesture, a memorial." I agreed, a lump in my throat. It was a pilgrimage, a desperate act of love and defiance. The day came. We loaded Emily's beat-up but reliable minivan. It was less conspicuous than Mark's SUV. The back was packed with our specialized gear, provisions, and for Emily, an array of sketching materials. The drive to the provincial park was quieter than my last journey, but no less tense. The familiar sign, Blackwood Provincial Park, nature's untouched beauty, still felt like a cruel irony, but now it also held a new significance. This wasn't just untouched, it was ancient, it was alive. We parked the minivan in a small, less frequented lot, closer to the section of the park I now knew was crisscrossed with ley lines according to my research. We geared up, shouldering our heavy packs. Emily, despite her smaller stature, moved with a surprising resilience, her face set with grim determination. She looked at me, her eyes reflecting my own mixture of fear and unwavering resolve. "Ready, Jay?" she asked, her voice steady. I took a deep breath, feeling the faint, steady pulse of the mark on my arm. The whispers were a constant undercurrent now, clearer, more defined, like a faint melody playing just at the edge of hearing. "Ready," I replied, a vow to Mark, to Emily, and to myself. We stepped onto the lesser-known trail, the dense tree line quickly swallowing us into its emerald embrace. The canopy here was not as ancient as the deeper glade, but still thick, dappling the path with shifting patterns of light and shadow. The air was cool and damp, carrying the familiar scent of pine and damp earth, but now overlaid with the subtle, energetic hum I had grown accustomed to perceiving. Emily took the lead, guided by my internal sense of direction and her own map-reading skills. She moved with a surprising grace, her artist's eye seemingly picking up on nuances in the terrain I might have missed. She kept a steady pace, her senses alert, but without the desperate urgency that had driven me and Mark. Our approach was strategic, cautious. The initial hours were spent navigating winding paths, pushing deeper into the older sections of the forest. Emily's presence was a calming anchor. We talked mostly about strategy, about the whisperer, about the symbols, but sometimes in quiet moments about Mark, sharing memories, finding solace in each other's grief. As we went deeper, the forest began to shift. The trees grew older, their trunks thicker, their branches more gnarled. The undergrowth became sparse, replaced by a carpet of deep green moss. The silence began to descend, not absolute, but subtly profound, broken only by the rustle of our movements and the distant, rhythmic hum that was now undeniably present in my perception. Emily, too, began to notice it. Do you hear that, Jay?" she whispered, stopping suddenly, her head cocked to one side. A low hum, like a faraway engine. I nodded, a thrill of confirmation running through me. "That's it, Ems, that's the Blackwood, that's the Whisperer." Her face was pale, but her eyes held a strange, fascinated intensity. "It's palpable, like the air itself is vibrating." She pulled out the audio recorder, clicking it on. We pressed on, guided by the intensifying hum and the increasingly frequent ancient carvings on the trees. They were still subtle, weathered, but more prevalent here, confirming we were nearing the Whisperer's deeper domain. Around midday, we found a suitable location for our base camp, about 2 kilometers from where I estimated the ancient glade to be. It was a sheltered alcove beneath a massive granite outcrop, well hidden and offering good sightlines down a natural drainage. We quickly set up a small, camouflaged tent, prioritizing stealth and security. Once camp was established, we began deploying our equipment. We set up the thermal camera on a tripod aimed towards the direction of the glade, hoping to catch any energy fluctuations. The EMF detector was placed on a flat rock, its needle already quivering faintly. The audio recorder, left on continuous loop, was positioned to capture any subtle sounds. Emily then took out her sketching supplies. "All right, Jay, show me your mark and tell me again about what you felt when you pushed back." I pulled up my sleeve, revealing the faint but still present symbol. I described the surge of anger, the defiance, the white light, the raw power. Emily listened, her charcoal moving swiftly across the paper, replicating the symbol, then adding subtle variations, new lines, trying to interpret the flow of energy I described. "It's like a circuit, Jay," she murmured, sketching intently. "An open circuit when it's just calling you, and then, in that moment, you completed the circuit, but in reverse. You pushed energy out instead of letting it pull energy in." "But how do I control it?" I asked, frustrated. "It was instinct, Rage. I can't rely on that." "Precisely," she said, looking up, her eyes bright with thought. "And that's where the symbols come in. These aren't just pretty pictures, Jay, they're instructions. Language. What if the symbol isn't just one thing? What if it's a composite? A binding sigil, yes, but also a channel for resistance." She started sketching frantically, combining elements of the spiral and the eye, reversing lines, adding new, intuitive strokes. She even tried incorporating patterns from other ancient warding symbols we'd researched. It felt almost like magic, but I knew intuitively that she was tapping into something real, something primal. As she sketched, I closed my eyes, focusing on the mark, on the hum of the Blackwood. I tried to visualize the energy flowing through me, through the mark, not as a destructive force, but as a directed current. I focused on a feeling of protection, of self-preservation, of a shield, rather than an attack. And then faintly I heard it, a different kind of whisper, not the resonant hum of the Whisperer, but a softer, almost melodic tone just at the edge of my hearing. It felt responsive, like an echo. "Jay, look," Emily exclaimed, her voice sharp. I opened my eyes. The EMF detector was spiking wildly, its needle thrashing. and on the thermal camera's display, a faint, amorphous heat signature was visible far in the distance in the direction of the ancient glade. It was pulsing, expanding, then contracting. "It knows we're here," I whispered, a chill running down my spine. "Or it feels us." Emily grabbed her own camera, focusing the telephoto lens towards the glade. "It's reacting to our energy, Jay, to your mark, to our intent." She took several rapid photos. The next few days passed in a tense, methodical routine. We would wake before dawn, monitor the glade, analyze the data. The whisper's presence was constant, a pervasive hum on the audio recorder, a fluctuating energy signature on the EMF detector, and the occasional, fleeting heat anomaly on the thermal camera. It was like observing a vast, unseen beast, feeling its breath, its movements, without ever truly seeing its form. Emily continued her work with the symbols, meticulously drawing, experimenting, creating new combinations. She theorized that the original symbol was a key to the whisper's energy. By modifying it, by imbuing it with a different intention, we could essentially reprogram that key, transforming it from a binding agent into a releasing or deflecting one. She started calling these modified symbols countersigils. One evening, as dusk painted the sky in shades of bruised purple, I was meditating, trying to focus on a new countersigil Emily had drawn on my forearm with charcoal. It was an inverted spiral, encased within a broken eye. The intent was clear: to reverse the flow, to break the gaze, to sever the connection. As I focused, pouring my will and all my grief-fueled resolve into the symbol, the mark on my arm began to tingle. Not painfully, but with a vibrant, buzzing sensation. The whispers in my head intensified, no longer just a hum, but a swirling cacophony of voices, ancient and alien. It was overwhelming, a flood of fragmented thoughts, images, and raw emotions. I saw flashes of trees growing, dying, regenerating. I felt the slow, patient hunger of the earth. I perceived the whisperer's vast, unfathomable consciousness, its desire for connection, for stasis, for eternal beauty. And then, amidst the chaos, a clear, resonant voice cut through, not from the whisperer, but from within my own mind. A new voice, or perhaps an aspect of the whisperer I hadn't perceived before. The marked one, you listen, you seek, you defy. The voice was crystalline, like ice shards tinkling, yet warm, like sun-drenched moss. It resonated with a profound age, different from the whisperer's deep, consuming hum. This voice was not a summons, but an address. It was not a collective, but a singular consciousness, ancient and piercingly intelligent. My eyes snapped open. The cacophony of whispers in my head momentarily receded, leaving only the echo of this new voice. The buzzing in my arm intensified, a thrilling, almost painful vibration. The EMF detector continued to shriek, its needle pinned to the red. On the thermal camera, the distant anomaly pulsed violently, a raging green inferno against the cool backdrop of the forest. "Jay, what was that?" Emily grabbed my arm, her face pale. "The air just changed, and the hum, it's gone from a rumble to a scream." "It's here," I breathed, staring at the thermal image. "Or it feels us, but something else, something spoke." "Spoke to you?" Emily's eyes darted around the encroaching gloom, her hand instinctively reaching for the small hunting knife clipped to her belt. "What did it say?" It acknowledged me. It called me the marked one." I recounted the words, the strange sensation of its presence. It felt different, not like the whisperer's pull, more direct, individual. The new voice or presence receded then, leaving behind a lingering sensation of cold clarity. The cacophony of whispers returned, but now it felt more organized, like distinct channels opening, each carrying a fragment of information, a pattern of energy. It was overwhelming, a flood of data I struggled to process. Maybe it's another aspect of the whisperer, Emily mused, her brow furrowed in concentration. Or perhaps another entity entirely. Abernathy mentioned ancient ones, plural. What if the Blackwood isn't just one consciousness? Before I could reply, the thermal anomaly intensified, growing larger, closer. The ground beneath us began to vibrate with a low, guttural thrum that even Emily could feel. The trees around our camp swayed imperceptibly, their leaves rustling as if stirred by an unseen wind. "It's coming closer," Emily whispered, her eyes wide. "We need to be ready. What do we do?" "Stay calm," I urged, trying to keep my own voice steady. "Remember the countersigil. Focus on protection, on deflecting its energy." I gripped her hand, trying to convey a reassurance I didn't entirely feel. We don't engage unless we absolutely have to. We observe, we understand. The air grew heavy, thick with the metallic sweet scent I remembered from the ancient glade. The green phosphorescence began to appear, faint at first, then spreading like a creeping mist through the undergrowth. Tendrils of glowing green light snaked through the air, reaching towards our camp, probing, testing. The whispers in my mind became a torrent, a relentless assault on my senses. I saw fragmented images, towering trees reaching for unseen suns, roots burrowing into molten earth, figures standing silent and still, their eyes glowing with internal light. It was the whisperer's consciousness, overwhelming, ancient, beautiful in its terrifying scope. But amidst this flood, I could still discern the fainter, colder echo of the other voice, an observer, a silent commentator on the unfolding drama. The marked one struggles with the tide, the binding seeks to reclaim its own. This voice was aloof, almost amused. It watched, it learned. It was not involved, but intimately aware. One of the glowing tendrils snaked right to the edge of our camp, hovering just inches from Emily's face. She froze, her breath catching in her throat, her eyes wide with primal fear. The green light illuminated her features, turning them into a mask of terror. The whisperer's hum filled the air, a deep, pervasive vibration that seemed to seep into our very bones. "It seeks the marked one's companion," the new voice observed, a hint of something akin to curiosity in its tone. A familiar pattern, a new game. My blood ran cold. It was the same tactic it had used with Mark, to isolate, to claim. "No," I roared, a raw, defiant cry that tore through the suffocating silence. I pulled my arm back, focusing all my will, all my desperate anger, all my resolve into the countersigil Emily had drawn on my forearm. The inverted spiral and broken eye glowed fiercely, mirroring the faint pulse of the faded mark beneath. A wave of pure, concentrated white light erupted from my arm, not a blinding flash like before, but a directed pulse. It struck the glowing tendril, not with explosive force, but with a precise, severing touch. The tendril recoiled instantly, shrieking, retracting into the phosphorescent mist. The whisperer's hum wavered, its presence momentarily retreating. The thermal anomaly on the screen flickered, diminishing slightly. Emily gasped, her eyes fixed on my arm. "Jay, you did it. You controlled it." I stared at the countersigil, then at the retreating tendril. The control wasn't perfect. It was still fueled by intense emotion, the fear for Emily, the rage against the whisperer, but it was directed. It was a shield, not an uncontrolled explosion. The new voice was silent, observing. "It's not enough," I said, my voice hoarse. "It's just pushed it back. It will be back. We need to go in." Emily, though still trembling, nodded. Her fear had been replaced by a grim resolve. "Okay, we follow the energy signature. We find the source." She retrieved the camera with the telephoto lens. "I'll try to get visuals as we get closer." We packed our essential gear, leaving the bulk of the camp camouflaged. Our pace was slow, cautious. We moved through the glowing mist, each step deliberate, our senses heightened. The phosphorescence grew stronger, illuminating the ancient trees, turning the blackwood into an ethereal, haunting landscape. The whispers in my mind were no longer a chaotic flood, but a distinct, guiding hum, like a compass needle pointing to its true north. The new voice, however, remained silent, a watchful presence, observing our every move. We followed the ley lines I'd seen in my dreams, pathways of energy visible now not just in my mind, but almost tangibly in the shifting patterns of the phosphorescent moss on the ground. It was like walking along an invisible river of power, flowing directly to the ancient glade. The carvings on the trees became more intricate, more pronounced, glowing faintly with the same green light as the moss. They weren't just symbols now, they felt like active conduits, part of a vast, interconnected network. Emily sketched them as we passed, noting their patterns, their subtle variations. "They're like a circuit board," she murmured, her artist's eye dissecting the patterns. "Connecting points, transferring energy, each symbol is a relay." "And the glade is the central processor," I finished, a chilling realization. As we neared the glade, the metallic sweet scent of decay grew overpowering, a sickening perfume in the humid air. The trees gave way, revealing the familiar, vast cavern entrance choked with glowing green moss. This time there were no glowing tendrils lashing out. Only the deep, resonant hum vibrating from within the cavern, a constant, pervasive presence. "It's waiting," Emily whispered, her hand tightening on my arm. "Or healing," I corrected, remembering the whisperer's shriek of agony when I'd lashed out. "We wounded it. It's recovering. That's our chance." We moved into the cavern, the immense space stretching out before us, filled with the eerie green glow. The petrified figures stood silent, motionless, their empty eye sockets glowing faintly with internal light. Mark's form, distinct in my memory, was there, a silent sentinel, eternally vigilant. My heart ached with renewed grief, but also a fierce determination. Mark's sacrifice would not be in vain. The central core pulsed, a swirling vortex of green light and shadow, much dimmer than before, almost fragile. The Whisperer's presence was still immense, but it felt contained, wounded. As we stepped onto the moss-covered floor, the hum intensified, a low growl of awareness. The petrified figures seemed to lean towards us, their glowing eyes fixed on me, on the mark. A profound sense of loss, of stasis, of ancient, unmoving consciousness washed over me, a silent chorus of the Whisperer's victims. The marked one returns, the defiance persists. The crystalline voice echoed in my mind, observing from afar. The companion approaches the sacred ground. A new connection is forged. My gaze was fixed on the Whisperer's core. This was it, the heart of its power. "Emily," I said, my voice low and steady. Remember the plan, observe the symbols, find any irregularities, look for the nexus points, the places where the energy seems to flow strongest. She nodded, already moving, her artistic eyes scanning the walls, the floor, the base of the massive central core itself. She held her camera ready, snapping photos, but mostly she was sketching, her charcoal flying across the paper, capturing the patterns, the subtle differences in the symbols on the cavern walls. I, meanwhile, focused on the mark. I closed my eyes, letting the whispers flow through me, trying to differentiate the whisperer's dominant hum from the subtle undertones, the deeper rhythms of the blackwood. I poured my will into the countersigil on my arm, visualizing it not as a shield, but as a key, a severing blade. The whispers intensified again, and this time I could discern more than just the whisperer's consciousness. I saw flashes of ancient entities older than the whisperer, entities that had slumbered beneath the blackwood long before it awakened. They were vast, formless aspects of the earth itself, feeding the ley lines, maintaining a delicate balance. The whisperer, I realized, was not the absolute ruler of this place, but a powerful, ancient guardian, a manifestation of one specific aspect of the Blackwood's energy, the consuming, transforming aspect. And the new voice, the crystalline one, it was one of those older, more subtle entities, an observer, perhaps even a balancer. The marked one perceives the deeper truths, the crystalline voice affirmed. The veil thins, the connections reveal themselves. Suddenly, Emily cried out, "Jay, look here, there's a pattern here." She was pointing to a section of the moss-covered floor near the base of the Whisperer's core where the symbols were densely concentrated, glowing with a more intense green light. These symbols, they're different. They seem to be radiating outwards like spokes from a wheel. In one of them, it's a jagged spiral, but it's inverted, almost like your countersigil, but subtly different. My heart hammered, "Show me." I knelt beside her. The symbols she pointed to were indeed unique. They formed a complex mandala, a circular pattern of intertwined spirals and abstract eyes radiating from a central point. In one of them, a jagged spiral was almost identical to the countersigil Emily had drawn on my arm, but rotated as if its power was meant to flow inward, not outward. "This," Emily whispered, tracing the unique symbol with a trembling finger, "this feels like the true binding point, the anchor, the source of its specific power." As she spoke, the whisperer's core pulsed violently. The hum deepened, becoming a low, frustrated growl. The entire cavern vibrated. Tendrils of green light erupted from the core, lashing out towards us, not in a direct attack, but as a warning, a territorial display. "Intruders, desecrators, you touch the sacred bond," the whisperer's voice thundered, no longer calm, but filled with ancient fury. "You cannot sever what is eternal." "The anchor point," I repeated, ignoring the lashing tendrils as I focused on the specific symbol Emily had highlighted. My mind raced. If this was the true binding point, the very core of its consuming power, then perhaps by activating my countersigil in direct proximity, I could disrupt it. Not destroy the Whisperer, but sever its capacity to bind and consume. To turn it off, or at least redirect its malicious function. "Emily, I need you to draw this countersigil exactly as you did on my arm on that central inverted spiral," I said, pointing to the key symbol in the mandala. "Quickly." Emily didn't hesitate. With trembling hands, she took a piece of charcoal and began to draw, her movements precise, focused, despite the danger. The lashing tendrils of green light came closer, some brushing against her hair, some coiling around her legs. She flinched, but didn't stop, her eyes fixed on the task. The whispers in my head turned to a roar, overwhelming, discordant. The whisperer was fighting back, trying to break my focus, to flood my mind with fear and despair. I saw Mark's face, frozen in a silent scream, his body withering, twisting. My grief, my guilt, threatened to consume me. The marked one wavers, the truth is heavy. Can you carry the weight? The crystalline voice inquired, still aloof, still observing. I have too, I screamed, not at the voice, but at the invading despair. I clamped down on my emotions, forcing myself to push past the horror, past the grief. I focused on my purpose, on Mark's sacrifice, on Emily's unwavering determination. My rage hardened into resolve, my fear into a cold, clear focus. I raised my marked arm, the counter sigil on my forearm glowing with fierce white light. I placed my palm flat against the central, glowing inverted spiral on the moss-covered floor where Emily was finishing her drawing. "Now, Jay," Emily cried, her charcoal line completed, the counter sigil overlaid on the Whisperer's own binding symbol. A surge of raw power, a familiar white light, erupted from my mark, channeling directly into the overlaid symbol on the floor. It wasn't a destructive blast, but a precise, directed flow. It was like plugging into a giant, ancient circuit and reversing the polarity. The cavern erupted in a cacophony of sound. The Whisperer shrieked, a sound of pure, unadulterated agony, tearing at the very fabric of existence. Its central core pulsed, not with green light, but with a chaotic maelstrom of white and green, struggling, fighting against the invading energy. The ancient symbols on the walls flared, then dimmed, then flickered out completely, plunging sections of the cavern into utter darkness. The petrified figures, including Mark, shuddered. A faint tremor ran through the entire glade, as if the very earth was protesting. The green light of the cavern flickered violently, oscillating between brilliant emerald and dark, oppressive gloom. The metallic sweet scent intensified, replaced by a momentary stench of ozone and burnt earth. I felt a tremendous draining sensation, as if my very life force was being pulled into the mark, into the earth, into the whisper itself. The whispers in my mind were now a single, deafening scream of pure, desperate agony. "You break the bond, you shatter the peace, you sever the beauty," the whisperer roared, its voice filled with a terrible, ancient despair. My body convulsed, trembling under the immense strain, my vision blurred. I felt Emily's hand grab my shoulder, her silent strength a lifeline. She was channeling her own intent, her own unwavering will into me, into the countersigil. The overlaid countersigil on the floor pulsed, growing brighter, consuming the Whisperer's original symbol, twisting its meaning, reversing its flow. The white light from my arm raged, feeding into it, overwhelming the green. And then, with a final, agonizing shriek that seemed to tear the air, the Whisperer's central core imploded. Not with an explosion, but with an internal collapse, a sucking void of darkness and silence. The swirling green vortex vanished, leaving behind only a faint, residual shimmer in the air, like dust motes dancing in sunlight. The profound hum that had permeated the cavern, that had defined the Blackwood, ceased. The phosphorescent moss on the floor and walls dimmed, then slowly faded, plunging the cavern into near total darkness, save for the faint, erratic pulse of the countersigil on the floor and the fading glow of my own mark. Silence descended, a heavy, absolute silence that was more terrifying than any scream, the kind of silence that suggests a presence has been utterly annihilated. I stood there gasping, utterly spent, my body shaking uncontrollably. The mark on my arm throbbed not with power but with exhaustion, a deep, aching emptiness. My legs gave way and I collapsed to the mossy floor, Emily catching me, supporting my weight. "Jay, are you okay?" she cried, her voice trembling but filled with a mixture of terror and awe. I could only nod, struggling for breath, my throat raw. The whispers in my mind were gone. The crystalline voice was gone. Only the profound, echoing silence remained. We looked around the cavern. The petrified figures were still there, still motionless. But the faint internal glow in their eye sockets had vanished. They were just statues now, cold, inert stone. My eyes found Mark's form. His face, once frozen in a silent scream, now seemed placid. The faint green phosphorescence that had covered his skin was gone. He was still a statue, still unmoving, but the terrible, ancient glow, the sign of the Whisperer's binding, had faded. He was no longer a watcher, but a silent memorial. A fresh wave of grief, sharp and raw, washed over me. It was done. The Whisperer's binding power was broken. It could no longer consume, but Mark was still gone. "The connection is severed," the crystalline voice echoed, faint now, almost a memory, but with a note of finality. "The balance is restored. The marked one has fulfilled a purpose greater than his knowing." And then it too was gone. "Is it truly gone?" Emily whispered, her voice barely audible in the vast silence. "The Whisperer's power to bind and consume," I clarified, my voice hoarse. "Its core is gone. Its influence, I think it's broken." I looked at my arm. The mark was still there, a faint, angry red tracing, but it no longer pulsed. It felt dormant, exhausted. "What about Mark?" Emily asked, her voice cracking. She stumbled towards her brother's figure, her hands reaching out but hesitating before touching him. I pushed myself up, my muscles screaming in protest, and walked to Mark's side. He was cold, hard, stone-like, but the pervasive alien glow was gone. He was still, but he was no longer connected. "He's free, Emily," I whispered, tears blurring my vision. "He's at peace." Emily crumpled beside him, burying her face against his petrified leg, sobbing uncontrollably. Her grief, unconstrained, filled the cavern, a raw, human sound in the wake of ancient, unnatural silence. I knelt beside her, my hand resting on her shoulder, sharing her pain, sharing the emptiness that came with victory. We stayed there for a long time, mourning, finding a grim solace in the profound quiet. The cavern was no longer alive with ancient dread, but simply a cavern, vast and empty. Eventually, the chill of the cavern began to settle in. We couldn't stay. The Blackwood was still vast, still ancient, and though the Whisperer's binding power was broken, its deeper truths, the other entities, the raw energies, still existed. "We need to go," I said, my voice barely a whisper, "before anything else awakens." Emily nodded, slowly rising, her face streaked with tears, but her eyes now held a newfound peace mixed with the enduring pain of loss. She looked at Mark one last time, then gently laid a small, polished stone on the moss at his feet, the one he always carried. Then she placed the photographs and his favorite book there too, a silent memorial, a final farewell. "Let's go," she said, her voice firm despite the grief. We made our way out of the cavern, each step heavy, each breath a conscious effort. The path back through the forest was different. The phosphorescent moss was dull, almost completely faded. The ancient carvings on the trees were still visible, but they no longer pulsed with internal light. The air was cool and crisp, no longer heavy with the metallic sweet scent of decay, nor vibrating with the whisperer's hum. It was just a forest again, ancient and vast, but no longer actively malevolent. The journey back to our camp was a blur of exhaustion and numb relief. We dismantled our equipment in silence, packed it away, and prepared to leave. The EMF detector was quiet. The thermal camera showed only the normal heat signatures of the forest. The audio recorder captured nothing but the rustle of leaves and the chirping of crickets. The Blackwood was still a wilderness, but the overwhelming sense of dread, of being watched, of being hunted, had lifted. It felt quiet, sleeping. We drove out of the provincial park in Emily's minivan, the setting sun painting the sky in fiery hues. The world outside the Blackwood seemed brighter, sharper, more vibrant, yet also strangely muted after what we had witnessed. The road out was long and winding. Neither of us spoke much, lost in our own thoughts, our own grief, our own bewildering transformation. Emily, the artist, had faced down an ancient horror for her brother. I, the engineer, had wielded a power I still barely understood. We arrived back at my apartment in the early hours of the morning, drained but resolute. Emily collapsed onto the couch, falling into a deep, dreamless sleep. I sat at my desk, staring at the mark on my arm. It was a subtle, angry red line, no longer pulsing, no longer burning, just a scar, a reminder. The whispers were gone, the crystalline voice was gone, the Blackwood was silent within me. But the silence was not absolute. It was a new kind of silence, filled with the potential of what had been and what could be. The world had changed, and so had I. The experience had cracked me open, revealing new perceptions, new abilities, a deeper connection to something ancient and fundamental. I spent the next few days taking care of practical matters. I called Mark's parents again, this time with Emily beside me. We told them a heavily sanitized version of the truth, that Mark had gotten lost in a remote section of the Blackwood, succumbed to the elements, and that we had found his body, preserved by a rare, natural geological phenomenon. We described the discovery with mournful conviction. The necessary lie a heavy burden. They were devastated, of course, but the closure, even a false one, brought them a measure of peace. They understood Mark's adventurous spirit, his love for the wild. The idea of him being lost, then found in a strange, preserved state, was tragic, but believable enough in the context of the Blackwood's ancient, unique environment. The police were skeptical of the geological phenomenon, but without a body to investigate and with Mark's adventurous history and our convincing, grief-stricken accounts, they eventually closed the case as a tragic accident in the wilderness. It was a hollow victory, but it allowed us to begin rebuilding our lives, or what was left of them. Emily moved into my apartment temporarily. We needed each other, needed to process what had happened, to navigate this new, impossible reality together. Her artistic intuition, combined with my analytical mind, had been a potent force. Now, her steady presence was a constant reminder of our shared burden and our shared resolve. We spent countless hours talking, replaying every moment, trying to make sense of the incomprehensible. We continued our research, but with a new focus. No longer just about the Whisperer, but about the deeper energies of the earth, about other ancient entities, about the true nature of the mark. The mark on my arm remained, a subtle, almost invisible scar. It no longer burned, no longer pulsed, but I knew it was still there, a dormant conduit, a potential that lay sleeping within me. My heightened senses remained, though I had learned to filter out the overwhelming input, to consciously attune myself to the subtle hum of the world only when I chose to. My dreams were no longer nightmares of the Whisperer. They were vast, intricate tapestries of the Blackwood, showing me ley lines, root systems, hidden caverns, and the faint, almost imperceptible echoes of other ancient entities slumbering beneath the earth. The crystalline voice was gone, but its final words haunted me, a purpose greater than his knowing. What did that mean? What was my purpose now? Emily, with her artistic insight, helped me interpret these new dreams. She saw patterns in the energy flows, connections in the abstract imagery. We began to sketch new symbols, not for binding or severing, but for balance, for healing, for attunement. The Whisperer wasn't evil, Jay, she mused one evening, sketching a complex mandala of intertwining roots and flowing currents. It was just an expression of a force, a consumer, a transformer. We didn't kill it, not really. We just deactivated its specific function. We restored a balance. But what if something else awakens? I asked, the fear still a cold knot in my stomach. What if there are other, worse things now that the Blackwood's primary guardian is dormant? She looked at me, her eyes thoughtful. That's what we need to find out, and if they do, you're still marked, Jay. You still have that connection, that power. The realization hung in the air, heavy with responsibility. I had broken the Whisperer's binding, but I hadn't necessarily made the Blackwood safer. I had merely shifted the balance, and in doing so, perhaps opened myself to new, unforeseen threats. My life was irrevocably changed. I couldn't go back to engineering. The mundane world felt thin, translucent. I had seen behind the veil, touched something ancient and fundamental. My purpose was no longer about blueprints and formulas, but about understanding the unseen, about maintaining the fragile balance between worlds. One day, while researching ancient pictograms that seemed to depict figures wielding glowing symbols, Emily found something truly startling. A reference to sentinels of the veil, individuals in various cultures who were said to be marked by the earth, possessing the ability to perceive and influence its hidden energies. They were often guardians, mediators, or in some cases, conduits for ancient powers. Their symbols, while diverse, often shared elements of spirals, eyes, and intricate knots, echoing the mark on my arm. Jay, Emily said, her voice hushed, her finger tracing a blurry image in an old, yellowed text. Look at this. The jagged spiral, the abstract eye, these are their symbols. You're not just marked, you're one of them. The text described how sentinels were often drawn to places of intense telluric energy, places like the Blackwood. They were not chosen, the text implied, but rather activated by encountering such forces, their inherent potential unlocked by trauma or profound connection. This was my new truth. I was a sentinel, and my journey, my terrifying pilgrimage into the Blackwood had only just begun. The Whisperer might be silenced, but the ancient forest, with all its hidden wonders and terrors, still called to me. And now I was connected to it, forever bound to its secrets. We spent weeks piecing together the lore of these sentinels. They were depicted as a lineage, not by blood, but by circumstance, by the mark they bore and the burden they carried. They were tasked with observing, protecting, and when necessary, intervening in the delicate balance of the unseen world. They were bridge builders between the mundane and the magical, navigators of the ley lines, interpreters of the earth's ancient consciousness. My mark, I realized, was not just a symbol of my encounter with the Whisperer. It was a birthright of a terrifying lineage, a key to a world I never knew existed. Emily, though not marked, was becoming an invaluable partner in this journey. Her artistic perception and intuitive grasp of abstract concepts allowed her to see patterns and connections that my analytical mind, for all its newfound capabilities, sometimes missed. She was my interpreter, my sounding board, my anchor in a reality that constantly threatened to unravel. We understood that we couldn't stay hidden forever. The world, for all its ignorance of the unseen, was still connected to it. And now, with the Blackwood's major consuming entity dormant, other forces might stir, other balances might shift. My dreams were growing more vivid, more complex. I saw glimpses of other places, other ancient sites, connected by the same energy lines, carrying the echoes of other entities. The Blackwood was not an isolated anomaly, but a nexus point in a global network of unseen power. "We can't just ignore this, Jay," Emily said, her voice filled with a quiet urgency. "This is bigger than just the Blackwood. This is the world." I nodded, staring at the faded mark on my arm, which now, in the right light, seemed to glow with a faint, almost internal warmth. My purpose, once a desperate quest for survival and vengeance, was evolving. It was no longer about fighting the Whisperer, but about understanding a far larger, more intricate web of existence. We began to prepare again, not for a fight, not for an immediate confrontation, but for exploration, for learning, for adapting. We acquired new skills, new equipment. Emily studied ancient languages, convinced that the symbols and the whispers held deeper linguistic roots. I meditated, practiced channeling my intent through the mark, trying to achieve a finer, more precise control over the subtle energies I could now perceive. Our next destination was uncertain, but the path forward was clear. We had to follow the threads of connection, to learn more about the Sentinels, about the Blackwood's deeper lore, about the ancient entities that slept beneath the earth. The world was full of mysteries, and I, the marked one, was now irrevocably bound to unravel them. The memory of Mark still stung, a constant ache in my heart, but it was also a driving force. His sacrifice had not been in vain. It had awakened me to a new reality, a new purpose. And if I was now a sentinel, then I would honor that calling. One evening, as the moon cast long shadows across my apartment floor, I felt a familiar, subtle tingle in my arm, a faint echo of the mark's dormant power. It wasn't a summons, but a soft, internal hum, like a deep breath. And then a new whisper, faint but clear, resonated in my mind. It was not the Whisperer, it was not the crystalline observer. This whisper was different. It felt ancient, yet distinctly human. A voice that had once walked the earth, now speaking from beyond the veil. "The marked one, you are not alone." My breath hitched. I knew that voice. It was filled with a familiar skepticism, a familiar loyalty. "Mark," I whispered into the quiet room, my heart hammering against my ribs. The whisper came again, softer this time, almost a sigh. "Seek the heartwood, the true balance awaits." And then it faded, leaving only a lingering sense of peace, a familiar warmth that brought tears to my eyes. Emily, who had been sketching on the couch, looked up, her eyes wide. "Jay, what is it?" I felt a shift, a presence. I looked at her, then back at my arm, a new, impossible hope blossoming amidst my grief. Mark was still gone, but perhaps he wasn't entirely lost. Perhaps he was somewhere connected to the Blackwood in a way I hadn't understood. "He's still here," I said, my voice choked with emotion. "He's still with us, he just spoke to me." Emily's face broke into a fragile smile, tears welling in her own eyes. "Mark," she whispered, a hand flying to her mouth. The message was cryptic but clear. The Heartwood. It wasn't just a place in the Blackwood, it was a concept, a deeper truth Abernathy had only hinted at in his more esoteric writings. The very core of the ancient forest's consciousness, not the Whisperer's consuming aspect, but its life-giving, sustaining force. My purpose shifted again, becoming sharper, more focused. I had broken the binding, restored a balance, but now I had a new quest, a deeper understanding of the Blackwood itself, a search for the Heartwood, and perhaps a way to truly find Mark, to communicate with him, to understand his new state of being. The Blackwood was still full of secrets, still held untold power. And I, the marked one with Emily by my side, was ready to delve deeper than ever before. The story of the Blackwood and of my own transformation was far from over. The search for the Heartwood began, not with a frantic dash back to the Blackwood, but with meticulous preparation. Mark's message, though brief, resonated with the quiet certainty of truth. It wasn't a ghost story, but a directive, a glimpse into a reality far more profound and complex than we had previously imagined. If Mark, even in his petrified state, could reach out, it meant he wasn't merely a statue. It meant a deeper connection, a different kind of existence within the ancient forest's vast consciousness. Emily and I huddled over Abernathy's journals, now scarred with our own notes and charcoal sketches. "The Heartwood," she murmured, tracing a finger over a faded, cryptic passage. "Abernathy speaks of it as the true anchor, the sustaining pulse of the Blackwood. He describes it as a place of immense vitality where life itself is concentrated, purified." "But not the glade where we found Mark," I interjected, recalling the oppressive stasis of that place. "That was the Whisperer's domain, a place of consumption and transformation. The Heartwood sounds like its opposite." Emily nodded, her brow furrowed in concentration. "Exactly, and that's why Mark's message is so crucial. He's guiding us away from the binding aspect of the Whisperer and towards the life-giving essence of the forest. He's telling us where the real balance lies." Our initial research focused on sifting through Abernathy's more abstract poetic entries, looking for any geographical clues, any symbolic representations that might point to the Heartwood. He spoke of roots that drink the sun's fire, of a central nexus where all life converges, of the whispering earth breathing life anew. It was all incredibly vague, metaphorical, but Emily, with her artistic eye for pattern and symbolism, began to weave connections. "The jagged spiral isn't just about connection or a labyrinth, Jay," she explained, sketching rapidly. "In many ancient cultures, it also represents growth, life cycles, the unfolding of creation. And the eye, not just binding or perception, but also the eye of creation, the point of origin. What if the Heartwood isn't just a location, but a living, breathing entity, symbolized by a perfect, complete version of the spiral and the eye?" My own dreams, now vivid and intricate, became a new map. They no longer showed me the aggressive ley lines leading to the Whisperer's glade, but rather deeper, more subtle currents of energy. I saw vast, interwoven root systems pulsating with a gentle, golden light. I perceived underground rivers flowing with silent, living energy. And sometimes, faintly, I heard a new hum, distinct from the Whisperer's aggressive pulse, a soothing, resonant thrum that felt like the earth's own heartbeat. I began to practice attuning myself to this new hum. The mark on my arm, though dormant, still felt like an antenna. I focused on the feeling of life, of growth, of profound peace, trying to consciously channel these emotions into the mark. It wasn't about power, not like before, but about resonance. I was learning to listen, not just to perceive. Emily, meanwhile, immersed herself in geology and ancient cartography. She theorized that if the heartwood was a nexus of telluric energy, it might correlate with specific geological formations, unusually rich mineral deposits, unique crystalline structures, or areas of intense seismic stability. She cross-referenced Abernathy's vague descriptions with old maps of the Blackwood, looking for any anomalies, any place that seemed to fit the profile of both intense natural energy and secluded, untouched sanctity. Weeks turned into months. We fell into a new routine, our lives consumed by this profound quest. My apartment became our research hub, a chaotic but organized repository of maps, books, geological surveys, and Emily's ever-present sketches. We ate, slept, and breathed the Blackwood. Our relationship deepened, forged in shared trauma and a common, impossible purpose. We were each other's anchors, sounding boards, and unwavering allies. Emily, with her sharp wit and occasional bursts of grim humor, kept me from succumbing to the weight of my responsibilities. I, with my newfound perception, gave her the tangible feedback she needed to translate abstract concepts into actionable insights. One evening, after countless hours of fruitless searching, Emily let out a triumphant gasp. She was hunched over a faded, hand-drawn map of the Blackwood's oldest sections, a map she discovered hidden within the pages of one of Abernathy's leather-bound journals. "Jay, look at this," she exclaimed, her finger jabbing at a small, unlabeled clearing deep within the most ancient, least explored part of the forest. The clearing was encircled by a faint, almost invisible symbol, a perfect, unbroken spiral, interwoven with a distinct, open eye. It was drawn in a different ink, with a lighter hand, as if added as an afterthought or a carefully guarded secret. My heart leaped. "That's it," I breathed, a profound certainty washing over me. "That's what I've been seeing in my dreams. The golden light, the ancient roots, it's this place." Emily's eyes glowed with excitement. "Abernathy tried to conceal it, I think. This map isn't about the Whisperer, it's about the source. He marked it with the true symbol, the symbol of balance and life." The journey to the Heartwood, we knew, would be even more perilous than our encounter with the Whisperer. This wasn't about confronting an enemy, but about seeking a profound truth, a sacred place. We prepared differently. Our equipment wasn't just for detection, but for interaction, for deep exploration. We packed specialized tools for cave exploration, more advanced communication gear, and even more extensive medical supplies. We also brought a small collection of offerings, polished stones, seeds, pure water, based on our research into ancient rituals of reverence for nature spirits. Emily insisted it was less about superstition and more about respecting the energies of the place. My training intensified. I learned to project a sense of respect, of seeking, of understanding through the mark. I could now consciously dampen its aggressive potential and amplify its receptive qualities. The whispers in my head were no longer chaotic, but a gentle chorus, a living library of the Blackwood's deeper rhythms. I learned to discern the subtle shifts in the air, the faint echoes of the crystalline observer that still occasionally manifested, a silent, knowing presence watching our preparations. "The marked one seeks the core," it whispered one night in my dreams, its tone neither approving nor disapproving, but simply stating fact. "The path is arduous, the truth is boundless." We departed under the cover of a crisp, early autumn morning. This time there was no minivan. We drove an older, more rugged SUV, better suited for the remote, unmaintained roads that led to the Blackwood's deepest, most untouched sections. We parked at the very edge of where the logging roads ended, far from any established trails or park boundaries. Our destination was a place almost entirely off the grid, a section of the Blackwood that had seemingly resisted all human encroachment. The air here was different. Even before we entered the tree line, I felt it, a profound sense of antiquity, of untouched power. It wasn't menacing like the Whisperer's domain, but overwhelmingly alive, vibrant, almost singing with unseen energy. Emily felt it too. "It's like walking into a cathedral," she murmured, her voice hushed, "but one built by time itself." The forest swallowed us whole. The trees here were truly immense, their canopies forming a dense emerald roof that filtered the sunlight into ethereal shafts. The ground was soft with centuries of accumulated moss and fallen leaves, silent under our heavy boots. The silence, again, was not absolute, but filled with the myriad tiny sounds of a thriving ecosystem, the rustle of unseen creatures, the distant call of birds, the gentle murmur of a hidden stream. And beneath it all, the earth's heartbeat, the heartwood's gentle thrum, growing clearer with every step. Our progress was slow and deliberate. Emily navigated using Abernathy's old map, supplemented by GPS and my own internal compass, which seemed increasingly attuned to the ley lines. We encountered no signs of human presence, no discarded trash, no faint trails, nothing but pristine wilderness. The carvings on the trees, so prevalent near the Whisperer's glade, were entirely absent here. This was a place untainted by the Whisperer's binding, untouched by any of its ancient consciousness. We set up small, inconspicuous microcamps each night, prioritizing stealth and minimal impact. Emily continued her sketching, capturing the unique flora and fauna of this ancient section of the Blackwood, drawing strength and focus from the intricate beauty around us. I spent hours in meditation, allowing the Heartwood's hum to wash over me, trying to learn its nuances, its language. It was a complex symphony, not a single note. I began to perceive different channels within the hum, representing different aspects of the forest's life force. The slow, patient growth of the trees, the energetic flow of water, the hidden life within the soil. One afternoon, as we pushed deeper into a particularly dense section of ancient firs, I felt a shift. The air grew perceptibly warmer, even though the sun was dappled. A new scent, rich and earthy, like ancient loam and fresh sap, filled my nostrils. The hum intensified, vibrating not just in my mind, but through the soles of my feet, up my legs, into my very bones. "We're close," I whispered, my voice thick with awe. "Very close." Emily's eyes were wide. "I can feel it, Jay. It's like the air itself is charged alive." We rounded a bend in the ancient forest, pushing through a curtain of hanging moss, and then we saw it. It wasn't a glade, not in the traditional sense, but a vast, natural amphitheater, a hollow in the earth enclosed by colossal, impossibly ancient trees. Their trunks were so thick, so gnarled, that they seemed to merge with the surrounding rock, their upper branches disappearing into the sky, forming a living cathedral vault. The sunlight, when it broke through, cast shimmering, golden pools of light onto the forest floor. But it was the center of this amphitheater that truly captured our breath. There, rising from a mound of vibrant, glowing green moss, was a single immense tree. It was unlike any tree I had ever seen. Its bark was a mosaic of swirling patterns, reminiscent of the jagged spiral, but smooth, unbroken, imbued with a deep, pulsing, golden light that seemed to emanate from within its very core. Its branches, thick as lesser trees, reached upwards and outwards, ending in leaves that shimmered with an almost liquid gold. And at the base of this tree, nestled amongst the roots that glowed with the same internal light, was a pool of water so clear, so still, that it reflected the golden light of the tree like a liquid mirror. The water itself seemed to pulse faintly. This was it, the heartwood. The air around the tree was warm, almost balmy, and filled with the rich, sweet scent of life. The hum was overwhelming here, a profound, resonant chord that filled every fiber of my being, but it was not aggressive, not consuming. It was welcoming, ancient, pulsing with an incredible, undeniable vitality. "It's beautiful," Emily whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "It's truly beautiful." She unslung her camera, but then hesitated, lowering it. "No, this isn't something to be captured, it's something to be experienced." We approached slowly, reverently, our boots sinking into the incredibly soft, vibrant moss. As we neared the great tree, the golden light intensified, warming our skin, filling us with a sense of peace and profound connection. At the very base of the tree, where its mighty roots met the earth, the symbol Emily had identified on Abernathy's map was clearly visible, etched into the glowing bark. A perfect, unbroken spiral intertwined with a distinct, open eye. It was pulsating gently, its golden light mirroring the heartbeat of the forest itself. This was the true heartwood, the sustaining pulse. As I stood before it, the mark on my arm began to tingle, not with the familiar surge of power, but with a gentle, harmonious vibration. The whispers in my mind coalesced, not into the cacophony of the whisperer, but into a single, profound truth, a living language flowing from the tree itself. It wasn't words, but concepts, feelings, images, the interconnectedness of all life, the delicate balance of growth and decay, the eternal cycle of the blackwood. And amidst this profound flow of information, a new voice, familiar yet different, echoed in my mind. "You have found it, Jay, the heartwood, the true center." It was Mark. His voice was clearer now, less like a whisper, more like a direct thought, imbued with a deep, calm wisdom. It still had his essence, his familiar tone, but overlaid with something ancient, something profoundly integrated with the blackwood. My breath hitched. "Mark, where are you? Are you in this tree?" His reply was instantaneous, though still not verbal, but a cascade of images and feelings. I saw myself standing before the tree. I saw the energy of the tree flowing into me through the mark. I saw the heartwood's roots extending deep into the earth, connecting to vast, unseen networks of energy. And then I saw Mark. Not his petrified form, but an energetic echo of him, woven into the very fabric of the heartwood's golden light, a radiant pattern within the vast, luminous network of roots. He was part of it, connected to it, an eternal guardian. "I am everywhere, Jay, and nowhere. I am the heartwood, and the heartwood is me." His presence was not just a voice, but a comforting warmth that permeated my entire being. "My purpose here is fulfilled. I am a part of the balance now, a sentinel in a different way." Emily, seeing the profound change in my expression, knelt beside me, her hand resting on my arm near the glowing mark. "Jay, is it Mark?" I nodded, tears streaming down my face, but they were tears of understanding, of release. "He's here, Em. He's part of the heartwood. He's found his peace." I relayed Mark's message, translating the cascade of feelings and images into words. Emily listened, her own eyes filling with tears, but her face was alight with a fragile, beautiful smile. She reached out, gently touching the glowing bark of the heartwood tree, a silent connection with her brother. He's alive, she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. Not as we knew him, but he's alive, he's everywhere. We spent hours at the Heartwood, bathing in its golden light, absorbing its profound energy. The mark on my arm pulsed with a steady, gentle rhythm, mirroring the Heartwood's own pulse. I felt an incredible sense of clarity, of connection, as if every cell in my body was humming in perfect harmony with the earth. I understood Mark's transformation not as a tragedy, but as an evolution, a profound act of integration into the Blackwood's ancient consciousness. He was still Mark, but a Mark transformed, a part of something eternal. The crystalline voice, the aloof observer, reappeared in my mind, its tone softened, almost reverent. The marked one has understood. The sacrifice has become purpose. The balance is true. What is my purpose now? I asked it, my voice echoing in my own head. To be the bridge, it replied, its voice like the gentle rustle of leaves. To weave the threads, to maintain the equilibrium. The Blackwood holds many paths, you are now attuned to them all. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple above the vast amphitheater, Mark's voice spoke to me again, a final, clear message. The Whisperer's binding is broken, but its hunger remains. It sleeps, but it is not gone. Other forces stir now that the scales have tipped. You must watch, Jay, protect the balance, seek out the others. Others, I asked, a fresh wave of concern washing over me. The Sentinels, he clarified. You are not alone, you never were. They will find you, or you will find them. The feeling of his presence began to recede, a gentle fading, a profound parting. Live Jays live for us all. And then he was gone, his light absorbed back into the immense golden pulse of the Heartwood. The tree continued to glow, its life force immense and comforting, but the individual consciousness of Mark had receded into the greater whole. He had delivered his final message. We knew it was time to leave. We offered our small collection of polished stones and seeds at the base of the Heartwood tree, a gesture of respect and gratitude. As we turned to leave, I looked back one last time. The Heartwood pulsed, an eternal beacon of life, holding Mark's essence within its boundless embrace. The journey back was different. The forest, though still vast and ancient, no longer felt unknown. It felt understood. I could feel its myriad energy channels, its subtle currents, its hidden life. The mark on my arm was now a part of me, no longer a separate entity, but an extension of my own senses, my own will. We returned to my apartment, exhausted but transformed. The profound grief for Mark was still there, but it was now laced with a strange, impossible peace. He was gone, yes, but he was also more present than ever, a part of the very fabric of the Blackwood, forever connected to its life force. Our research now shifted entirely. The Heartwood and Mark's message had given us a new direction. We focused on the Sentinels of the Veil, the marked ones. The lore Emily had found now seemed less like obscure mythology and more like a roadmap. We scoured ancient texts, obscure historical records, and forgotten folk tales, looking for any mention of individuals with similar marks, similar abilities, similar purposes. The text spoke of sentinels being activated by powerful telluric energies, often in places like the Blackwood. They were drawn to places of imbalance, places where the veil between worlds thinned. They were guardians, mediators, sometimes even catalysts for change. Their symbols, while varied, always contained echoes of the spiral and the eye, symbols of connection, perception, and cyclical power. We learned about a global network of such individuals, often working in isolation, sometimes in small, secretive groups. They were protectors of ancient sites, observers of elemental forces, healers of energetic wounds in the earth. The idea was overwhelming, a vast, unseen world operating just beneath the surface of mundane reality. My dreams became a training ground. I learned to navigate the ley lines of the Blackwood, exploring its hidden caverns, its underground rivers of energy, its slumbering entities. I began to sense other powerful places on Earth, distant hums and whispers, faint echoes of other ancient sites, other potential sentinels. The Blackwood was a nexus, but it was not alone. Emily, with her growing understanding of ancient languages and her intuitive grasp of symbolic logic, helped me translate these dream visions into actionable knowledge. She was learning to interpret the subtle energies through my descriptions, becoming a true partner in this new reality. She even began to develop her own unique sensitivity, a quiet resonance with the natural world that sometimes allowed her to perceive faint energetic shifts, almost like a ghost limb remembering a forgotten sense. "The mark is a key, Jay," she explained one morning, poring over a faded map of ancient trade routes that seemed to follow ley lines. "It unlocked your potential, but the true power, I think, comes from understanding the language of these energies. The Blackwood spoke to you, now you have to learn to speak back." We began to experiment. Using the modified countersigils and new symbols for balance and attunement, I practiced channeling specific intentions into the mark, not just to deflect, but to soothe, to guide, to influence. I learned to filter out the overwhelming static, to focus on specific energy frequencies, to communicate with the Blackwood on a deeper, more subtle level. It was like learning a new instrument, intricate and profound. One of our most profound discoveries came from an obscure alchemical text that Emily found in a dusty online archive. It spoke of resonant stones, naturally occurring crystals, imbued with specific elemental energies that could amplify or direct telluric forces. The text described how sentinels often used these stones as tools, as focal points for their abilities. This led us to a new kind of preparation. We began to seek out these resonant stones, not just for their inherent power, but for their potential to help me fine-tune my abilities to act as conduits for more precise influence. We acquired a small collection, each one humming with a distinct, subtle energy, a smooth, dark obsidian for grounding, a shimmering quartz for clarity, a vibrant amethyst for intuition. Emily, with her artist's eye, designed intricate settings for them, turning them into wearable talismans, each one a mini amplifier for a specific intent. The Blackwood, meanwhile, began to stir in new ways. The absence of the Whisperer's dominant hum created a vacuum, a quietude that allowed other, more subtle energies to rise to the surface. We learned to perceive faint, lingering traces of the crystalline observer, which seemed to be monitoring the new balance, subtly guiding us. We also began to feel the stirring of other, more primal entities, not malevolent, but vast, slumbering forces of the earth, now slowly awakening from their long dormancy. These entities were not like the Whisperer. They were aspects of the planet itself, ancient earth elementals, vast water spirits, silent wind currents, and the latent fire within the deep rock. They were not malicious, but neutral, powerful, and utterly indifferent to human concerns. Their awakening presented a new, profound challenge: how to interact with these forces, how to maintain the balance without provoking their immense, raw power. Mark's final warning echoed in my mind. The Whisperer's binding is broken, but its hunger remains. It sleeps, but it is not gone. We understood that the Whisperer, though dormant, was still a part of the Blackwood's ecosystem, its capacity for consumption and transformation a necessary part of the cycle. Our act had not destroyed it, but merely recalibrated its function, stripping it of its ability to actively bind and petrify humans. But what if, in its dormancy, it slowly began to regain its strength? What if the shift in balance caused it to reawaken with a new, unforeseen hunger? One day, while exploring an abandoned copper mine on the outskirts of the Blackwood, a place known for its unusual geological formations and high mineral content, my mark flared unexpectedly. It wasn't the searing burn of confrontation, nor the gentle thrum of the heartwood. It was a sharp, urgent tug, a distinct pull towards something in the earth. "Jay, what is it?" Emily asked, her hand flying to her chest. She felt a faint tremor in the air, a subtle shift in the oppressive quiet of the mine. "Something's here," I whispered, my eyes scanning the dark, damp tunnels. "Something ancient, and it's calling to me." We moved deeper into the mine, guided by the increasingly insistent pull of my mark. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of damp earth and something else, something metallic and cold. The walls of the tunnel began to shimmer faintly, adorned with strange angular patterns that seemed to pulse with a dim internal light. They were not like the Whisperer's symbols, nor the Heartwood's elegant spiral, but something entirely different, more geometric, more rigid. We came to a cavern deeper than the rest, its walls lined with jagged, unpolished crystals that glowed with a faint, silvery light. In the center of the cavern, embedded in a large vein of shimmering, dark rock, was a massive, perfectly formed crystal, almost twice my height. It pulsed with an intense, cold light, a counterpoint to the golden warmth of the heartwood. As I approached the crystal, the mark on my arm burned with a fierce, cold fire. The air grew frigid, and a new whisper, harsh and brittle, filled my mind. "Another marked one, you have come. The awakening begins." This voice was entirely unlike any I had encountered. It was not ancient and consuming like the Whisperer, nor ancient and aloof like the crystalline observer, nor gentle and wise like Mark. This voice was sharp, metallic, cold, and filled with a profound sense of order. It felt like logic, pure and unyielding, manifested as a consciousness. Before I could react, Emily cried out, "Jay, look on the crystal." Etched into the surface of the immense crystal, glowing with an internal, silvery light, was a symbol. It was a complex, geometric pattern, a precise lattice of intersecting lines and perfect angles, all converging on a single, abstract eye. It was a symbol of absolute order, of structure, of a rigid, unyielding balance. "What is this place?" I murmured, awe and a chill of apprehension mixing in my gut. The voice from the crystal resonated again, clearer this time. "This is a node, a point of pure structural integrity. I am the architect. I maintain the physical equilibrium of this domain, and now the imbalance stirs." "Imbalance? What imbalance?" Emily asked, her voice trembling slightly. "The consumer sleeps, leaving a void. The heartwood awakens, expanding its reach, and the shifting, it draws others, disruptions." The architect's voice was devoid of emotion, a pure statement of fact. "You, marked one, have altered the primary function. You have introduced chaos into a stable system." My blood ran cold. I had thought I was restoring balance. Had I merely created a new, more complex problem? "We didn't intend chaos," I stated, trying to keep my voice steady. "We restored what we thought was the natural order." "The natural order," the architect replied, its voice like grinding stone, "is not static. It is a constant negotiation of forces. You have merely shifted the terms, and now the terms must be redefined." It was then that I noticed movement at the edge of the cavern, shadows detaching from the darkness. Figures, Tall, slender, almost ethereal, their bodies composed of shifting, silvery light. They floated silently, their forms vaguely humanoid but devoid of any discernible features beyond the luminous outlines. They emanated the same cold, analytical presence as the architect. The sentinels of order, the architect stated. They respond to shifts, they will observe, they will maintain the structure. The silver figures glided closer, their presence radiating an intense, unblinking scrutiny. They weren't aggressive, but utterly alien, focused solely on observation and analysis. They felt like living algorithms, silent enforcers of an unseen cosmic law. Another marked one has been activated by the Heartwood's surge, the architect continued, its focus now shifting slightly. A new pattern emerges. Before I could ask what it meant, one of the silver figures glided directly towards Emily. It stopped inches from her face, its luminous form shimmering. Emily froze, her eyes wide, but surprisingly not with fear, but with a strange, fascinated intensity. She reached out a trembling hand, not to push it away, but to touch it. "It's beautiful," she whispered, her artistic sensibility overriding her fear. "Like pure light, pure thought." The silver figure tilted its head, an almost imperceptible gesture, and then a faint, golden glow began to emanate from Emily's own hand, mirroring the shimmer of the Heartwood's light that still resonated within me. My eyes widened. "Emily, what's happening?" The architect's voice resonated with a rare hint of something, not emotion, but a shift in its objective analysis. The Heartwood's expansion, the marked one's companion, not marked by binding but by resonance, a new connection, an unexpected variable. The golden glow on Emily's hand intensified, forming a faint, intricate pattern on her skin. It wasn't a jagged spiral or an abstract eye, but a delicate, interwoven knot, a symbol of complex connection and pure attunement. It was a mark, not of power, but of profound sensitivity, of a direct link to the Blackwood's life force. "Emily, you're marked too," I breathed, a mixture of awe and concern washing over me. She stared at her hand, then at the silver figure, a look of bewildered wonder on her face. "It's warm," she whispered. "It feels like understanding, like I can hear the life in everything." The silver figure retracted, its purpose seemingly fulfilled. The golden knot on Emily's hand pulsed softly, a quiet echo of the Heartwood's vitality. "A new sentinel," the architect stated, "not by trauma but by resonance, a delicate balance, the threads intertwine." My mind reeled. Emily, a sentinel, not with the raw power I possessed, but with a different kind of connection, a subtle attunement to the Blackwood's life force itself. It explained her unique artistic perception, her ability to see patterns and energies. She had